Welcome to Cowboy Cartel, the podcast. We're live every Sunday at 8:30 p.m. Central on Facebook and YouTube. Join us to ask questions and be part of the conversation. If you can't make it, catch the podcast a few days later wherever you get your podcasts. We're truly grateful for the continued support from American Hat Company and Joby's Hats. American Hat Company, proud to be an American, proud to wear an American. American Hat is the official hat of Cowboy Cartel. And if you're looking for the perfect fit, look no further than Joby's Hats, our official hat shaper. Check out our new online hat shaping school and our store at cowboycartelgroup.com for the latest editions. Now let's get into it and see what's been happening this week.
Hey guys, welcome back. Thanks for joining us. I'm Joe.
And I'm Lorena.
Connor's not with us tonight, but if you were here early enough, you got to see some of the video we took at the Paperback Cowboy Fandango. I messed that up like 14 times before we started tonight. So we were out at Turkey, Texas last week, and we got there was a big event. It was an artist festival.
Oh, yeah.
It was really cool. And we took a lot of video there, and we met a lot of really cool people, including this guy, Mr. J.B. Zielke. He is the author of this book, The Lost Cowboy. JB has cowboyed on 6 continents.
That's right. Yep.
Hey, welcome. Thanks for being here.
Glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. I'm really excited. I've been excited all week about you being in here. There's a funny story I want to tell before we get started because I learned about JB while watching a Dale Brisby podcast with Coulter Wall. And you're friends with Coulter. Mm-hmm. And he mentioned this guy who has cowboyed on 6 continents and wrote a book. And I'm like, well, that's really cool. I got to know more, right? So I go to your Instagram and I look through it and I followed you, and then I forgot about it because I'm busy, right? Mm-hmm. And I just I didn't think I'd ever meet you, and then all of a sudden we're at the Caprock Cowboy Fandango, and I'm there. We're videoing. I'm taking pictures, and there's this book on the table with a bunch of books, but you weren't there, right? Mm-hmm. And so I think we left and we came back, and we went to dinner that night. And they had a show. They had a bunch of music acts in there, and it was a really good time. And Jerry Gazelle, our buddy, he's been on the podcast. He was there, and so after dinner, I go out and we're drinking a few beers, and I'm talking to Jerry, and Lorena's standing there next to me, and I say, "Hey, look. This book, The Lost Cowboy, I saw it sitting out there. Is the author here?" and Jerry looks at me and goes, "Yeah, he's right here." Yeah. You were standing there right between me and Jerry this whole time and just being all quiet.
Yeah.
He just pointed like, "Yeah, this guy right here."
I'm like, holy crap, oops. But I just thought that was a funny story. And, and then we got to talking. And you got so many interesting stories, and I'm so glad that you were able to make it here because where are you from? Tell the guys where you're from.
I'm from Wyoming. I lived in South Central Wyoming for a long time, and just recently, like about a month ago, I moved up to Gillette, Wyoming, which is right in the corner of Montana, South Dakota, and Wyoming up there. And I moved up there because I'm putting on a music festival up there, and we kind of needed a home base kind of office up there. So moved everything up there, and I'm very rarely there. I spend about it's about 290 days a year on the road.
On the road, yeah.
So I don't really need a house.
Yeah.
But we needed a place to store things for the festival. So now, but Wyoming in general.
So in addition to The Lost Cowboy, you have another YouTube and Instagram called Dusty Vaquero.
Right.
And that is kind of all about music and musical acts and specifically working cowboys who are artists. Mm-hmm. Is that right? Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. So that the idea came about that I knew all these cowboys that were also singing songs, but not a lot of people knew about them. And I thought it would be really cool to go around and get videos with people like that. And so I really had no idea what I was doing. I did a little photography here and there, but I didn't know much about that until I got a camera that could shoot video, and I started going around shooting these videos, and within 2 months probably I had shot with 30 or 40 different artists. It took off immediately, and people were really open to the idea. Um, but the idea was that I felt like there was a lot of people singing songs about things that they didn't know what they were talking about, specifically in the Western world, because it's popular right now, and that's great. But I wanted to shine the light on these people that they were doing this before it was cool. They'll be doing it after it was cool, and their songs are really genuine and written about living the lifestyle out there on farms and ranches and stuff like that. So not every person on the channel is a working cowboy. Some of them are slightly removed from that, where maybe their dad was, or their brother still does it, or something like that. But every single person on the channel has a really strong tie to agriculture, and they've been around it quite a bit. And that's kind of what I base the whole thing off of, is giving. I hope I can give a place for those people to be found by the public, maybe that hasn't heard of them.
So you have this is your inaugural music festival coming up.
Mhm.
Tell us about it. When is it? Where is it? And how can people find out more information on it?
Yeah, so the festival it's in Gillette, Wyoming, May 30th and 31st. Very end of May. It's going to be at the Camplex, which, if anybody's familiar with that, it's where they do the high school finals. It's a great, big, very nice facility. We'll have camping, and there'll be horse racing going on. I think we're going to do some goat roping and other little side events and stuff. But 2 days of music, and if you want to find out more about it, we got an Instagram page and a website. DustyVaqueroDays.com is the website. Dusty Vaquero Days on Instagram. We've got the lineup up there, a bunch of information, and we're rolling more out as we get closer. It's coming up couple months out at this point. It's our first time doing it, so it's me and my friend Ryan are putting the whole thing on. It's just the two of us, so we're learning as we go, and it's coming together, and it's all artists that have been on my YouTube channel at one point or another, every single one of them. So we're putting them all together. We've got some full bands. We've got more like songwriter solo stuff, but it ought to be a dang good time.
So how did you learn? I mean, we've spent years learning how to shoot video, and we still screw that up. How did you learn how to shoot video? Like, because I've seen the videos on your YouTube, and they're pretty good. Like, they're clean. The audios are good too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, YouTube University. That's how I learned how to do that.
There you go.
I have no sort of formal training in any way. I bought a Sony A7 III, was my first camera that could do video and photos, and I still use that camera pretty much every day. It's been a workhorse. But I just went on YouTube and I learned how you color grade and how you mess with audio and things like that. So my videos that I make, they're very simple. There's not a ton of production that goes into it. It's all me. I don't have any outside editors or second shooters with cameras or anything. It's me and a camera on a tripod, and we just go out onto these ranches or places that have a connection to the artist, and we just sit down and do them out there. So it's very simple, but I've gotten better at just keep at that simple editing and sound editing and stuff like that. So that's, just trial and error, I guess, is how I learned how to do it.
There you go. I mean, that's kind of how we learned what we know, right? So
Oh yeah.
trial and error, and a lot of throwing away bad gear. And
Sometimes more error than trial.
yes. Yeah. I don't know. It took us at least 3 months to get live stream down, and I can't even say it was down because it's a struggle every day.
Yeah.
We just turned. It was just our third anniversary, by the way.
Third year anniversary.
Cowboy Cartel.
Friday. Yeah.
Yep.
So that was a lot of fun. It's been a long road. So where did you come up with the name Dusty Vaquero? It's a cool name.
I love it.
Yeah, I did. I wish there was a cool story that I had, but I remember that what originally happened is I had taken a video or two and I posted them onto my Lost Cowboy page. That page really has nothing to do with music, and none of the followers, not that they don't like music, but that's not why they follow that page for the most part. And I noticed pretty quickly that I would probably be better off creating a whole separate channel page, whatever, for those videos. And I was trying to think, well, what am I going to call this? And I wanted to keep it similar to the Lost Cowboy, but not that close. And so I just switched to Vaquero, but I thought, well, I just need to throw an adjective in front of it of some kind. So
That's perfect.
I was just driving down the road thinking of every adjective I could possibly think, throwing it in front of the word vaquero, and Dusty seemed to be the coolest one. So no great story behind that.
That's a pretty good story. It's
So that's where it came
not bad
from.
at all. So how'd you wind up at the Caprock Fandango this last weekend?
My friend Brennan Scott Green was playing out there, and another one of my buddies, Zach McGinn. Both of them are Texas guys, musicians, and Zach McGinn, to my understanding, kind of put together the musical side of what happened this past week. And so Brennan was already going, and he said, you ought to come down for this. And so he told Zach that I would be around, and so Zach was like, "Oh, we ought to have you set up and so put your books up and all that stuff." So Zach talked to the folks there at the Turkey Hotel Turkey, and
Yeah, I got that wrong too.
and yeah, so it was those guys that pulled me into it. But it was I knew a lot of those guys beforehand too. Slusher and Jerry and Click and a bunch of those guys that were hanging out there
Yeah.
we run into each other all over the country at different events.
It's really a small industry, right?
Mhm.
It's not that big, So I was surprised at how many people we've met and how many people we know. And I mean, Jerry and we have a mutual friend in Jerry, and I never even thought to say, "Hey, Jerry, you know anybody that knows this guy?"
Yeah.
And so I mean, you just don't think about stuff like that, but it's a really small community.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially when it comes to art.
Yeah,
The cattle industry is huge, horse industry is huge, but
true.
as far as people doing art and being in that kind of ranching cowboy world, that's a pretty small group and all very connected together.
Let's talk about the book because this is a fantastic book, by the way. Congratulations on the book. And if you guys are interested in this book in either paperback or the audiobook version of this, there's a link in the description for both of those books. I highly recommend it. We are not finished with it yet. I think we're about halfway through. We're at the point where you're at the swamp house in Argentina. And you've been to, so let's talk about, first of all, this is your first book. How did you go about writing this book? What was the driving factor, and how did that happen?
So when I was traveling, I wasn't really journaling too much at first. I mean, I was just a wild kid, just wanting to see things and live life. So I didn't really put a lot of thought into it. And really, when the idea of writing stuff down came about when I was in Mexico. And when I was in Mexico, I worked in I was in Chihuahua, and there was a lot of crazy stuff happening down there when I was there. And one night there was the stories in the book, but just to kind of condense it, basically, I ended up in the middle of a turf war gunfight between two cartel groups.
Wow.
And they weren't coming after me, but I was also kind of somewhat in the middle of it. So I ended up back at the house, laying on the floor below the windows, so I wouldn't catch a stray bullet coming through the windows. And I was laying there on the ground thinking, I could die doing any of this stuff that I'm doing on a regular basis. And some of my friends know some of these stories, but no single person knows all of them. If I did die, and I would like to not take these to the grave with me if possible. So the next day I started writing some stuff down just as little journal entries. And when I got back from Mexico, I went back to my grandpa's ranch, and I was night calving there. And up north, some people calve in January, February, March. So it's way cold at that time, and so you've got to go out and check those cows all night long. And so that was my job, was to pull the night shift. And so I'd go out every hour on the hour and check these cows, and then I'd come back and I'd sit in a barn or in a pickup, and I just started writing. And so I wrote this entire book in a calving barn over the course of, it took me 4 years, but I only worked on it during calving season because I was too busy the rest of the year. So
I understand that.
I would sit down and type this thing out, and I just kind of regurgitated onto the page, I guess. I didn't edit anything and just type. And so I would try and write minimum of 1,000 words a day. And because of that, kind of inadvertently, most of the chapters ended up being roughly that length. So they're fairly short chapters that you can read in 5 or 10 minutes or less and set it down and then pick it back up. So that's where it came from. But it was, people always find that interesting that I wrote it in a calving barn, and in about half the time I had like a sloppy wet calf on top of me, and I was covered in afterbirth and manure. And
Wow.
I'm just typing away.
Well, it's so interesting because if you think, oh yeah, he's been cowboy a few different places. Okay, cool. But it's crazy. Some of these stories are absolutely nuts. It starts in Australia,
Mm-hmm.
and you wind up barefoot, like you cowboyed barefoot like the entire time.
Yeah.
What is that about?
That's just how those Aussies are. They just really don't wear a whole lot of clothes, I guess. It involved a lot of running, catching a lot of those bulls and pulling them down and tying them up and stuff. And so that's hard to do in cowboy boots. So either you had sneakers, but a lot of those guys just never wore shoes, and they'd wear shorts and half of a shirt sometimes, and that was kind of it. So I just ended up kind of doing what they were doing and started running around barefoot most of the time. And it never was an issue, I guess, once my feet kind of hardened up to it, and
Right.
we would just catch bulls that way.
Yeah, I mean, tell the story about, like, they're catching bulls by swinging them on the round on their tail
Mhm.
and locking their
Yeah.
back legs. I mean, how does that even work?
Yeah, so I think probably a lot of people in the Western industry have probably seen the videos in Australia of people catching bulls with the hydraulic arm on the side of a Jeep. We didn't have that hydraulic arm. That was still kind of new technology when I was over there. So we would just catch them by hand or knock them over.
Mhm.
And
I vote for knock 'em over.
knock them over was probably a bit safer. It wasn't quite as fun as pulling them down
Yeah.
by their tails. And so we'd chase them down on dirt bikes or 4-wheelers or whatever and catch them. And if you get a hold of their tail once they've been running for a while, they can't turn around and get you because you've got their tail. As long as you don't let go, you probably won't get gored. But there was plenty of that happening. People catching
Yeah.
horns and getting sliced open and going to the hospital and stuff like that. But yeah, you'd just tail them down and then tie them up with the belt that you had on. Basically, you just take your belt off and tie their feet up, and then you come get them with a truck, or we would take them to a tree and tie them to a tree and come back and get them later in the day sometimes. But it was that was about half of what we did in Australia. Half of it was catching wild bulls. The other half was just rounding up cattle on cattle ranches, essentially.
Yeah. So this was you were working on a native land, right? So it was basically native land in the bush in Australia, northern Australia,
Right.
where there's not a lot of white guys up there, right?
No, very few.
So you got a lot of strange looks.
I did, yeah. It was we were on Aboriginal land, which is essentially like an Indian reservation here in the States, and that was part of where I was working. Part of it was just private land owned by a family, but on that Aboriginal land, that land had been given back to this tribe, and they had decided when it was given, it was a fully functioning, operating cattle ranch. And when they gave it to them, they didn't really care that much about running it as a ranch. They just wanted their land back.
Mm-hmm.
And so they just wanted to live on it. And that's what they did. And because of that, for 50, 60 years, whatever it was, that place just went unmaintained. So all the fences fell down, the cattle all just reverted back to being wild. So they're 10, 15 generations deep of never being handled by a human. And so it was just a, kind of untouched land with the occasional fallen down barbed wire fence. And the crew I worked for was hired to come in there and uh, the cattle. I think, well, people in the cattle industry know, but the the optimal way to run a ranch is you want as few bulls as possible and as many cows and calves as possible. When it reverts back to nature like that, it was 50% bulls, 50% cows, just naturally. So the goal was to get a lot of those bulls taken out of there so that they could put more cows in and keep keep it stable. So we were hired to come in and just clean up all of these feral wild bulls and get them out of there.
So how far from civilization are you at this point? Like, is it a good ways?
Yeah, you're a long ways.
So you don't want to get really hurt.
No, there was a situation where I got bucked off of a colt and got a pretty good concussion out of that deal, and they were worried about me, and so we used choppers to round up all these wild cattle. So one of the choppers landed, and I couldn't see out of one of my eyes after it happened. And at this point, between football and rodeo, I'd had a bunch of concussions. I knew exactly what it was, but they wanted to check. So they picked me up in a helicopter, little 2-seater, and they flew me into our camp where the cook was waiting. And then the cook drove me into the town where there was a clinic that was set up by the Royal Flying Doctors. It was like they set up in really rural areas where there's no health care at all.
Okay. So
I
like
go to
Doctors Without Borders kind of thing?
Kind of like that, yep. And but it's not, they're not set up to handle serious stuff, just minor things like that. So it took probably 2-3 hours, including helicopters and everything, to get me to that little tiny clinic.
Yeah.
And so they checked me out and they said, "You're good, just don't hit your head again." But they said, had that been worse, they would have had to have called a plane from Cairns to fly out there, land, pick me up, and fly me back to Cairns, which would have been another 3 or 4 hours on a plane. So that's how remote we were to get to any kind of real civilization.
So 2 hours, including a helicopter ride.
Yeah.
Just to be seen.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we know that Australia is home of probably 3 of the most deadly snakes and spiders.
Everything there wants to kill you.
I say that about Texas because everything in Texas wants to kill you too, but I think Australia is a lot worse.
Yeah, they all the snakes were, I'm from an area where there's rattlesnakes everywhere, but they make some noise and let you know where they're at. But in Australia, these are not rattlesnakes. There's inland taipans and king browns and things like that are some of the deadliest snakes in the world, but they don't make a sound, so you can step right on them without ever seeing them. And I think there's a snail there that's poisonous if you step on it. We were working right on the coast or close to it. We went and had a half a day off one day, and a friend of mine kind of whipped something at me with a stick that I thought was like a trash bag or something.
Yeah.
It was a box jellyfish that are incredibly deadly if you get stung by those. And then if you get into the pools and ponds and things right there on the coast, they're full of huge crocodiles, saltwater crocodiles. And then if you get out into the open water, there's just bull sharks everywhere. So you can't go in or near the water at all. And and then there's the spiders, those redback spiders. They're kind of like a black widow, and they would be everywhere that you looked. Any crevice or whatever was just, there'd be a redback in there that would bite you.
Man, that's crazy.
And then the green ants.
Yeah, the green ants. I mean, I'm not going to spoil that one. That one is fantastic, and also the bats, fantastic.
Yeah.
So you guys are going to have to read the book to hear some of these stories. I mean, you got to read the book. It's fantastic.
Yes.
Like, I've done some crazy stuff, and I've traveled all over the world, but no. No, thank you. I mean, but it's really interesting to hear and really interesting to talk about. One thing that really, what about like, did anybody get bit by a snake? Did any of that happen? Like, what was the worst thing that happened? I guess was it the head injury?
That was the worst thing that happened to me.
Yeah.
There was a guy that hit, all those fences had fallen down, but a lot of times the one wire that wouldn't fall down would be the top one.
Oh no.
So there was a guy that he was on a dirt bike going pretty fast and hit one of those top wires that was, kind of chest level with him riding.
Yeah. Well, luckily it was chest level then.
Yeah, but he hit it at an angle, which I guess was good or bad, but that's like hitting a chainsaw at that speed.
Yeah.
So it tore him up pretty bad. There's also a lot of termite mounds everywhere, which are rock hard, and the dangerous ones were the ones that were about grass height.
Mm-hmm.
So you'd be flying 40, 50 miles an hour on a dirt bike chasing a bull or trying to get to help somebody, and you wouldn't see this just rock hard pillar in the ground. And so there was several guys that broke shoulders and collarbones and arms and stuff wrecking dirt bikes. And there was a guy that caught a chopper pilot that caught a horn straight through his leg, just huge puncture wound right through the middle of it. But the getting gored by bulls was pretty. I think that was the only one that I was around for. But almost all those guys I worked with had some great big, like puncture wound scar on them from getting hit at some point.
So I mean, I know bulls. It's kind of hit and miss whether they're going to be aggressive or not. And cows here, going back to wild cows. Here you got a couple different kind. You got the one that's scared of you and won't get near you, or you got the guy, he's up here on top of you. So I mean,
right.
Like, are they more aggressive when they're wild like that, or are the cows and the bulls, or
they would? I think all of them, their first reaction is to run away.
Okay.
So you don't find out how mean they are until you get them cornered,
trying to catch them,
or tired, or something like that, where you've essentially taken away their option to run. Then you find out what's what, and cows or bulls or calves for that matter, they would all try and kill you. It was just
really
a matter of which ones were good at it and which ones weren't.
So, what was your favorite thing about Australia?
In the grand scheme of things, just going there and realizing that there's other ways of ranching and stuff. I'd only seen, I guess, and even at that point, not that much of it, but I'd only seen American ranching. And so to go over there and see them do things completely differently, but it works just as well, if not better, for their situation, that was pretty, that opened my mind in a lot of ways for me to realize how different all these cultures are and how they handle cattle. So that it was important that I realized that, because that's what led to all the rest of it. But I also really liked how, that was a real like renegade kind of outlaw crew that I worked for, just outcasts of society basically. And they were really hard on me, but I learned a lot from them, and I'm glad I did. I respect what they do big time.
Well, that reminds me. I remember reading that they had a real efficient way of branding, right? So they would doctor, brand, and cut them at the same time, and it only took you 3 guys, right?
3 of us, yeah. And it was very similar to what we call table branding here in the States, but I've never actually table branded, to be honest, in the United States. But it's hydraulic and it's kind of slow, and what we had was a very portable, small, run just by leverage chute. But we could brand, 3 guys could brand and cut horns and cut nuts and brand and vaccinate probably 300 to 400 calves, 3 guys easily in a day.
Yeah.
Which is that's very efficient.
So did you bring any of that back to the States and implement that in your work?
Some of it, but I generally don't feel it's my place to tell people what to do unless they ask.
Yeah.
So I'm more than happy to, like, if I go out, I day work on a lot of ranches and go help friends when I can. And if ever they ask, well, what do you think about this, or how would you? I've always got input for that. But for the most part, I just keep my mouth shut unless somebody asks me, because it's not really my place to be telling everybody how to do things. But
Right.
there's certainly pieces of. I mean, I was back in the States for 2 weeks before we had a cow that we had to doctor for some reason. I can't even remember why, but this was back on the ranch in Wyoming, and we're thinking, well, are we going to rope her and tie her off to the pickup, or try and get her to a chute? And I said, no, watch this. And I just hopped out, grabbed her tail, and threw her on the ground. And they had never seen anything like that. So there are some things that I brought back, but generally I just kind of sit back and watch.
So, I mean, it sounds like a great learning experience. Like,
Mhm.
I just can't imagine. Was there any kind of cultural barriers that you because I've seen language barriers and cultural barriers, in my travels. What about Australia? Is there anything there? Because I've never been to Australia. That's Australia and South America. Those are the two I've never been.
Well, the good thing about Australia is they speak English.
Yeah,
So
right.
that was a good place for me to go first, because there's certainly cultural things that are different, but they at least I could communicate with them. But even the Australian accent, that was a little bit hard to understand at first. And then the Aboriginal guys I worked with, they have a much, much stronger accent.
Yeah.
And so understanding that took me quite a while to get to where I could understand what they were saying. But there was just little things like, like washing your face in the morning. That was a huge. You had to wash your face. It was very rude not to wash your face and show up for breakfast in the morning. Things like that, which people do that, or some people do that anyways. But over there, it's kind of a requirement. Like you get called out if you don't wash your face in the morning.
That's interesting. And it's interesting you say that. There's two things there I wanted to address. The Australian accent for me isn't horribly hard. I can imagine, some of maybe the northern accents are, but we had a family from Australia come to our in-person hat shaping school a couple of weeks ago, and Lorena had a hard time because English isn't her first language, and their accent she's not used to, so she had a hard time understanding.
Yes. Yeah. And I'm pretty good at English. Imagine.
Yes. But I was curious about reading in the book, the way it sounds like you're out there sleeping on the dirt for months at a time, and I was wondering about the hygiene aspect of that. Did you have showers? Did you have running water and all of that?
So we did have showers. It was just like a 500-gallon, what do you call it? Like a tote.
Yeah.
That we just put it on a flatbed trailer so it would gravity feed down.
Yeah.
And so you could shower with. There's no heated water, no pressurized water, but you could wash off. So we had showers. That was also our drinking water. We had no filters, no chemicals. We drank the same thing that our horses drank and our cattle drank. It was just pumped straight out of a pond into a tank, and then that's what we drank.
Yeah, there's a fantastic story in the book about bad water.
Yeah.
And also filling canteens.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's probably the scariest thing, right? Because if you have to fill a canteen, just tell the story about how you fill a canteen in Australia.
Yeah, you got it. So they told me right away we would keep these small, like, Nalgene water bottles on our saddle, or some guys had bigger ones, but that's what I had. And then you just kept a little string or rope tied to it, because when we would get to a dirt tank or like a pond that we would let these cattle drink out of them, we're driving them to the corrals or wherever we're going, we'd stop and let them drink, but there's crocs everywhere in these dirt tanks. So you would get off your horse, let your horse go down to the water and drink, but you don't stand by the bank at all. You just catch your horse once he's done drinking. And if you got to refill your water bottle, you just toss it out there into the pond and just kind of drag it back with the rope, and then screw the top on, and that's how you'd get your water. But there was a very real threat of a croc coming up and just smacking you out of the water, and you wouldn't see it coming.
Yeah.
And so that was pretty scary.
And I mean, they got some of your calves right? Or
They would occasionally. They'd. It didn't happen a ton, but we'd have 1,000 to 2,000 head of cattle sometimes come up to these dirt tanks and start drinking out of them.
Yeah.
And sometimes they'd come up and whack, just grab one and then they're gone. But
Yeah.
you asked the chopper pilot. The chopper pilots really had the lay of the land a lot. They saw a lot more than we did, and they said they saw it way more often. That they'd see
Really?
like half-eaten ones on the bank or things like that.
Yeah.
So they figured that it was potentially as high as like a 1%, 1 to 2% death loss from crocs.
So how about getting sick? I know I've been sick a couple of times while traveling. Did you ever get just sick?
I got very sick when I was in Argentina.
Okay.
That was why I ended up coming home.
I haven't got that far then.
Yeah, it's the very last chapter of Argentina kind of explains that. But I've never had any kind of food poisoning. I think I just got guts like a dog.
Yeah, right.
Like I don't get sick from bad water. I don't get sick from food. I've never had an
Yeah.
issue with that. I got a mosquito-borne illness when I was in Argentina, and that shut down my liver. I didn't know it at the time, but I had stage 1 liver failure. Is why I felt
Wow.
so terrible.
Did you get dengue or
Zika.
Zika? Okay.
Wow.
I didn't know that actually caused any problems other than the birth defects.
That's what I thought too. But they said it still is, even if you're not a pregnant woman, it's very hard on your body.
Okay. I didn't know that. So good to know.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you're lucky because water gets a lot of people.
Mhm.
And I was in Mexico for months before I would even dare brush my teeth with sink water.
Yeah.
And I lived there on and off and back and forth because we had to travel to see each other
Mhm.
for years before she could come here. I got used to the water.
Mhm.
But I took my son to Mexico and like he got deathly ill
Oh, really?
I don't know if it was from the water or the fish. Those are two things a gringo should not do in Mexico.
Yeah.
Water and fish, just don't do it.
Yeah. I think I'm just lucky when it comes to that because I don't know if I just ate extra dirt as a child or something like that that gave me a stronger stomach. But
Right.
I've never had any issues with food or water traveling around. But I'd be traveling somewhere and there'd be another American with me or something, and I'd watch them get very ill. But it just never happened to me.
You're just built different.
I guess.
Drinking out of the same trough as the cow. That's what helps you out.
I mean, I think even back in Wyoming, if I'm thirsty, I'm gonna drink that water. And so there's been plenty of times where I've drank out of the same stock tank that my horses and dogs are drinking out of, and I don't think that's ever made me sick either.
Right.
So
Wow.
that's
That's
So you go to Australia. How long were you there?
I was there 3 or 4 months. So at that point when I went, I was still at the University of Wyoming, and I had 1 semester left of college. Otherwise, I probably would have stayed there a lot longer.
Really?
But I had to come back and finish my last semester of college so I could graduate. So it was basically I was gone the whole summer break is the time I was there.
Okay. Well, and then you go from Australia, you come back here and you finish school?
Yeah, I finished at Wyoming, and that was in December of 15. And then January of 16, I headed down to Argentina.
Okay. And so that's summer on the other side of the
It's
equator.
summer, right?
Because I was in Thailand in January and it was 100 degrees,
Oh yeah,
100%
super
humidity. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I went to Argentina I was finishing up my degree, and I have a degree in ag business and also veterinary science, pre-vet essentially. And I talked to somebody that had their master's in veterinary science, and they were kind of in the nutrition side of things. And they said that they were having a hard time getting a job because they weren't bilingual. They said that people that had like a high school level education that were bilingual were getting the jobs before them just because
Really?
of the language skills. And so I immediately thought, well, I've never taken a Spanish class in my entire life, so I should probably do something about this. I've got 1 semester of college left, so I'm not going to learn it here.
Right.
And so I started looking for countries that I could go to learn, because I figured at that time I was 22 years old, and I thought I just got to throw myself to the wolves and force myself to learn it.
Right.
So I looked at Mexico first. Seemed kind of scary with all the cartel stuff going on down there. Then I looked at Brazil, but I didn't think Portuguese would be that helpful here in the States. And so then Argentina was the next logical place that had a bunch of ranching but also spoke Spanish.
So at what point did you decide, well, let's hit all the continents?
It was after I'd returned from Argentina. I kind of thought I was done traveling at that point. I didn't have any further plans, and I got a job running a sheep, and it was sheep and cattle, but I had Peruvian guys that worked for me on the sheep side of things. So I was managing a great big, it was a portion of a ranch, but it was probably 250,000 acres total. And I had 5 or 6 Peruvian guys working for me. And so I was using that Spanish every day. It was getting better, and I was learning from them. And I thought that was going to be my career for the rest of my life, that's what I would be doing. And that all kind of fell out from underneath me, and I lost that job, and I was living out of my car. My 15-year-old brother was with me because he had come out to work for me for the summer. So it was me and my brother and 2 dogs living out of a $400 Buick Skylark that I had bought in town. And I pretty much lost everything at that point, and I was pretty lost and floundering around. And my brother, he's out there with me, and we're living on BLM land in the sagebrush, camping out of a car, trying to figure out what we're going to do. And he could see that I was pretty down and out, and he said, well, why don't you go back to what you enjoy doing and go travel? And he said, if you think about it, you've worked on ranches in the United States and in Australia and in South America. That's half the continent, so why not go for the rest? So it wasn't until that point that something clicked, and I thought, I probably could do that. So I made a phone call to a girl in Sweden that I had met at a ranching course, and her family had a big ranch over there. And she told me when she was in the States, if you ever want to come visit, doors open. And I said, well, be careful, because I actually will take you up on that. And so sure enough, about a year after I met her, I hit her up and said, can I come over? And she said, yeah, whenever you're ready. So I bought a flight that day and flew to Sweden.
Well, I don't want to get to Sweden yet. I want to go back to Argentina, because I haven't even read about Sweden yet. So, you initially went down to Argentina to work on Polo Ranch, right?
It was kind of like a dude ranch that part of what they did was played polo.
Mm-hmm.
They also did like just trail rides and rented out horses and stuff like that. But they had a need for people that could speak English, because most of their clients were English.
Okay.
So that was my kind of foot in the door.
And you learned to play polo.
Not well, but
Not well.
I learned the basics of it, and it was like once a week we'd go out and grab some horses, and we'd go in polo. They just say you stick and ball, which is essentially just, you go out in the field and just start smacking this ball around and just kind of get a feel for it and practice and pass to people and stuff like that. And it's a learning experience, figuring out how to lean clear down off the side of your horse, going fast, and connect a 52-inch mallet to a ball on the ground. It's pretty difficult.
Jerry Gazelle, he knows how to play polo. He's pretty good. Right?
He's actually good at it.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm not.
He learned to train horses from one of the premier polo horse trainers, right?
Yeah, that guy that he learned from is arguably the greatest American polo player that's ever existed.
Yeah.
And a great horseman on top of that. But so in polo, there's a ranking system, just like with team roping, where it goes from 0, or maybe it even goes -2 to up to 10. If you're 10, you're world class, top of the food chain. Rarely is there ever an American that's a 10. They're almost always Argentinians.
Really?
But that guy that Jerry worked for, I don't know if he ever made it to 10, but he was like 8, 9, somewhere up there. I mean, one of the top 50 in the world, probably.
You ever played with Jerry?
No, I haven't. I would. I just polo's such an expensive sport that I hop in when I get the chance, but it's also something I've never pursued because I just know that that's a lifetime of debt waiting to happen if I get hooked into it. So I don't really pursue polo that much.
So I don't know anything about polo. Obviously, if Jerry learned how to train polo ponies first, it's a different kind of training. Like you can't just go out and get your ranch horse and play polo. Or
You can.
You can.
You certainly can. There's so in Argentina, polo and soccer, but definitely it's kind of their way out. So you'll see ranch kids they'll just find any stick that's even somewhat close to the right length.
All right.
And they just practice whacking rocks on the ground next to them and stuff like that. And that, for a lot of them, that's the only chance they will have to get out and start making money is by getting good at polo. So you can certainly use ranch horses to play polo. They're not going to compete with the very high level ones because that's those horses are bred for that and top of the line. But even here in the States, there's a big polo club up in Wyoming.
There's
only
one in Louisville, Kentucky, too.
Yeah, there's anywhere that there's a big horse culture, there's probably some polo being played at various levels.
Yeah.
But the one in Wyoming, a lot of the people that play that are just cowboys, local cowboys.
Is that right?
And they'll go push cows in the morning with that horse and then load it up and bring it to the polo grounds and play a couple chuckers with it. So you can do both. And if you're a good polo player, you're a good horseman. Like doesn't mean you know how to read a cow or anything like that. But if somebody's a really good polo player, you could probably put them on any horse in the world and they would be good.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Yeah. It's probably one of the hardest disciplines you could learn.
Interesting. Well, you left the dude ranch and you went to where'd you go after that? So that's where I'm at in the book. So you went to another type of ranch, or you went to a couple different kinds.
A couple different ranches, yeah. So when I got to that dude ranch, I think there was just a miscommunication that I thought I was going to be horseback all day, every day.
Yeah.
That's what I thought I was signing up for. It ended up that it was required of me to help in the kitchen and do a lot more kind of guest hospitality stuff, which is fine, but that's not what I wanted to do. And so I started kind of looking around for other things that were more of just ranching.
Right.
And one of the guys that worked there, my friend Adolfo, he was kind of a guide at that place, but he was about to go back home to where he was from. His family had a ranch, and then he knew a bunch of ranchers in that area. He said, if you want to go home with me, I'll get you jobs where I'm from pretty easy. So that's what I ended up doing. And I went back there and I worked for a veterinarian. I worked for several veterinarians, but they owned their own ranches. So I would just work on their places. And those places were strictly cattle ranches. That's all they did. So they just they'd take me out there and show me my horse and introduce me to the cow boss and say, good luck. And so I learned a lot out there working with those guys.
So you get Zika virus and you come back and so, all right, you've gone through college, you got your degree, you had summer or winter off. How long were you in Argentina?
I was down there about 3 months also.
So you had 3 months.
And
then you had the summer. Any thought of going to veterinary school after that?
No, I think it was probably my second or third year at Wyoming that I realized I had already put myself out of the running with my grades.
Okay.
Because I had classes with students that were far better students than I was, and they weren't getting in. And so I knew, okay, well, I had a C in biology and a C in OChem, and there's no, I would have had to have straight A's that whole time to have gotten in. So I knew years before that there's no way
No way.
getting into vet school. Vet school is very tough
So,
nowadays.
so is that where the ranch management kind of came in? You're like, all right, well, I'm not going to be a vet. I'm going to go
Yeah.
manage a ranch.
Yeah, I realized probably the second year that I really hated OChem and chemistry and all these classes that are essential to being a vet.
Yeah.
But I had like a minor or some, I had to take some business classes.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed those. So I thought, well, I'm just going to lean harder into the ranch management side of things because that's probably what I would like to do anyways.
All right. Cool. So we talked a little bit before Argentina about after Argentina. So you came back here. You were managing a ranch.
Mhm.
That kind of fell through, and then you're going to go to Sweden.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me about Sweden. I'm not there in the book yet, so I don't know any of the stories. So tell us about Sweden and how long were you there?
Yeah, so I was in Sweden, I think like 89 days
Oh,
because
okay.
you get 90
Yeah.
days in that Sjögren area. So I filled it up as best as I could. That family that I went and worked for was an exception. I was very lucky to have found them because in Sweden there's like, I don't fully understand it, but there's caps on how much land you could privately own. So it's not possible to own enough ground to own a big ranch in
Mhm.
Sweden. This family was an exception because they had a lease on a military base, a huge military base. So as far as I know, I'm pretty sure that was the biggest ranch in all of Scandinavia or maybe Northern Europe. And it's a great big place, and we'd have to be, there's active military drills happening on this place while we're trying to ranch. So there's a shooting range, and they're chucking grenades and stuff over the hill practicing, and it was that particular base. My understanding was it was kind of like a Panzer division, heavy ground vehicles was
So you
really
got
what
tanks running around too.
there was multiple times where tanks would come over a hill and scatter our cattle everywhere because they're like 90-ton tank. You've probably been around tanks. They're loud and heavy
Yeah.
and just vibrate and everything, and so it would scare everything. But there was a time that we drove cattle and they kind of slowed at the front, and we couldn't figure out why. We're going through the woods, and our horses, their ears perked up, and we're thinking, what's going on here? We couldn't see anything. And finally, they all just stopped, and we're like, something is wrong here. And finally, a guy in full camo stands up. He's got an AR and everything, and
Yeah.
he just stands up and waves his hand. Didn't really say much, and then probably 40 more stood up, and we're like, oh, we just drove all these cattle straight into the middle of a drill that they're doing, trying to stay silent.
Right.
So it was, we were kind of ranching in the middle of a fake war the whole time.
Yeah. So, anything cool happen in Scandinavia? Oh, let me rephrase that. Anything crazy, because Argentina and Australia, a lot of crazy stuff.
Mhm.
Like there's a dip tank where you could have died in Argentina, and
Oh, yeah.
you guys are gonna have to read the book to get that info. But
Yeah.
But what happened? What about Scandinavia? Anything crazy there? They seem pretty laid back.
Yeah, it was pretty safe and
Yeah.
tame, like nothing real crazy. What I always tell people is the takeaway I got from there, the most interesting part of it was just, most places the biggest problems that ranchers are fighting are the environment or trying to find enough labor, things like that. In Sweden, their biggest issue was the government. The
Yeah.
government was in the middle of everything. So it was just
It's all of Europe.
tons and tons of regulations that was their biggest problem by far, was just staying in regulations and trying to raise healthy, profitable beef while staying within the law was their biggest issue.
So you're sleeping out in a hammock or on a crate in Australia, and
Mhm.
Obviously you're sleeping with mosquitoes in
Yeah.
Argentina. I'm assuming Scandinavia, it was a much better accommodations.
Yeah, just a regular it was like a 600-year-old farmhouse
Okay.
that we lived in. And I lived with, it was a family, and so I lived with the daughter and the son. They had a house there, and they were about my age, and so we all lived together. It was pretty easy, pretty pretty modern.
All right. So we are, where are we at here? We're 4 of 6 continents.
Mm-hmm.
And come back. How long were you back after you leave Scandinavia?
I didn't come back after
Oh,
Sweden.
all right.
That was the only time I didn't come straight back. I went from Sweden. I went straight down to South Africa, and I lived down there for a while. That South Africa was kind of interesting because I didn't know anybody there,
Yeah.
and I was trying to figure out how I can find a job or at least a place to get started to go work around. And
Wait, you just like, I guess I'm just going to go down there and see what I can find.
more or less, well, what I did was I found every Facebook group that had to do with South African farming.
Yeah.
And on every one of them, I posted that, I'm young guy, strong back, willing to work. I'm 22 or 23, whatever I was at that age. I don't care if you pay me, just give me a place to sleep and food. And most of what the feedback I got was pretty negative.
Yeah.
There was a lot of locals that were saying, this, you're not in the United States anymore. This is dangerous. You shouldn't be doing this kind of thing. And one person said, well, you should talk to this Future Farmers Foundation, which is a charity group that they take kids that come from the rural areas that are very underdeveloped and stuff, and they teach these kids. Basically, if they're interested in agriculture, they've set up a network where they can place these kids, if they want to raise rabbits for meat, or if they want to raise produce or poultry or beef or pork, whatever part of agriculture they're interested in, they have established ranches or production places where they can send these kids and have them basically mentor or do an internship. And by the time they're done, they should, in theory, be educated enough in that field to be like an assistant manager.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really neat to see. So I met the lady that started that, and she said, well, I would love to, if you want to come over to South Africa, I would love to send you around to a few of the bigger beef operations that we send kids to. And we have kids placed there. And I think it would be really good for them to work with you and kind of hear what you've seen and done. And then in turn, you can learn from them as well. So I got sent I probably worked on 5 or 6 different ranches all around South Africa while I was down there. Everywhere you go, you meet people, and if you're willing to work and willing to learn, most people are willing to let you come see what they do.
Well, South Africa is another one that's pretty dangerous, and for a few different reasons, right? So depending on where you're at, it could be the wildlife or the people.
Yeah.
So anything kind of crazy. Where were you in South Africa?
I flew into Johannesburg first.
Okay. So all right.
Got robbed in the airport.
Robbed.
That was, yeah. I
got robbed a few times.
I've been robbed and beat up in a lot of places around the world. This
Read
wasn't
the
the
book.
first for me. Yeah.
Read the book.
Yeah.
Yes.
But
there's a couple of good ones.
This guy tricked me in the airport and got like roughly $100 from me. And then I flew down to Durban from there, which is, I ended up working quite a bit of the time in a province called KwaZulu Natal.
Okay. I'm not familiar, but
that's it's kind of the more mountainous part of South Africa. I worked down there, and then it borders a little country called Lesotho, which is like a landlocked small country inside South Africa. I worked there for a while, and then from there I went down to I guess it would be Eastern Cape, which is a whole different like biome basically. It's really interesting in South Africa, it being the tip of the peninsula, and all those different ocean currents affect the weather big time. And so KwaZulu Natal had quite a bit of rainfall. Then you go over to the Eastern Cape, and it's pretty desert, almost like Wyoming. It's kind of sagebrush country. And then I went up and I worked in I think it's called the Northern Cape. So way up at the very top there, and that's where the Karoo Desert is, and it's very dry, and it's right on the Orange River, where anything that grows there is just because that river is going by. Otherwise, it's desert.
And then it goes, you get further out and it's just nothing.
Just turns into the Karoo.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I kind of bounced around and worked in a bunch of different places. I never did go up to, like, Kruger National Park is probably the most famous place there.
Mhm.
That's where people go on their safari tours and hunts and stuff
Yeah.
like that. I never did make it over to that part of South Africa.
So you never got far enough in to kind of see some of the lions and tigers and bears and kind of thing?
Oh, I had some lion run-ins.
Yeah, did you really?
Yeah.
Okay. Is it in the book?
Yeah. Yeah.
Let's tell me about it, because I haven't had a chance to read.
There was I went out hunting with my buddy Riche, and Riche was a veterinarian that I kind of helped him preg check cattle and stuff while I was
Yeah.
over there. His family had a
Lorena wants to do that.
Oh yeah.
do some preg checking. There's a demand for it. But Riche was a big hunter and big fisher, and he's like, if you ever want to come go shoot a springbuck or something like that, we weren't gonna hunt any, huge expensive
Right.
game, but just small, simple hunts. And I said, yeah, any of it, let's go.
Well, I mean, now you can say I've hunted in South Africa, right?
Yeah, so we were hunting springbuck, and I had been skunked the first 2 days, and we only had 3 days to shoot one. And so the last morning, I'm thinking, we're not going to get anything. I had seen them, but we couldn't sneak up on them close enough to shoot and all this stuff. So the sun's coming up. It's this great, big, beautiful, burning red African sunrise. And we see some springbuck off in the distance, and they're coming towards us. So I just lay down on a big flat rock, and he gets on one right next to me, and I got my rifle on the bipod, and I'm just laying there watching the springbuck through a scope. And I start to hear this kind of rumbling off in the distance, and I thought it sounded like a truck or something driving. And I thought, that's weird. We're so far out in the middle of nowhere. Who would be driving around?
Right.
And it starts getting louder and louder, and I look over at Riche, and I can see him kind of looking back my way, and he didn't say anything, and I'm still listening. It's getting louder as the sun's coming up more, and I look at him like, what is that? And he just kind of shrugged. He knew what it was the whole
He
time,
knew.
but he just kind of shrugged. And then once it got really loud, I realized it was a pride of lions,
Yeah.
and it was just on the other side of the ridge from where we were.
Yeah.
Like, they were not far away. I had 4 bullets with me total. But I was planning on shooting a springbuck that takes 1 bullet and we're done. So
yeah.
I didn't think we were going to be dealing with any big dangerous game
Yeah.
on this hunt. And so I turned, are those lions? And he says, yeah, don't worry about it. I said, no, I'm worried about it. There's a pride
Bet
of
you
lions on the other side of the hill. Yeah, I know if I shoot the springbuck, that's just ringing the dinner bell.
Yeah.
They're going to be coming in.
True. Yeah, that's right.
And so I told him, I was like, I don't want to shoot that thing. We've been stomping around out here for 3 days. I will happily go home empty-handed because I don't want to fight with lions.
Yeah.
And he said, no, it's fine. Just shoot it. And I said, no, man, there's no way. And finally, I think he was convinced I wasn't going to shoot it unless he told me. He goes, okay, that's a game preserve. And what you can't see is on the other side of the hill, there's like a 10-foot fence. So they can't get to us. There are lions right there, but they're not going to get to us. I said, okay, drop that springbuck.
Yeah.
Right after that. So it was in theory, it wasn't that dangerous, but
But you were still pretty scared.
Yeah, the exhilaration was still there.
I'll bet it was.
Yeah, that was pretty cool.
So, anything else crazy happen besides the lion run in and getting robbed in South Africa? Because I feel like South Africa would have been probably the most dangerous so far.
Yeah, I came up on a bank robbery while I was there, or bank truck, like armored
Okay.
truck robbery.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's common there.
Yeah, a very common thing.
Yeah.
We were going. I just hopped in a truck with a stranger, trying to get to the other side of South Africa. It was this old cattle trader dude, and we're driving along, and the whole highway comes to a standstill. Well, it was like a 2-lane road, I guess, but there was only probably 5 or 6 cars in front of us where
Yeah.
they had stopped traffic, and we're sitting there, and you can see up ahead of us, it looked like a truck had spilled its cargo up there or something. There's stuff all over the road. And then finally the cops came back and they were telling everybody to turn around. You couldn't get through. And it turns out it wasn't spilled cargo. There were dead bodies all over the highway because there was it was like 12 or 13 guys
Wow.
tried to rob this bank truck in broad daylight.
Yeah.
And the guys in the truck shot a few of them, but the cops were there really fast and shot all the rest of them. So they just gunned down like 12 guys right in the middle of the highway. And so they had to clean all that up. But we were 6 cars. If we would have been in front of that, we would have been, if we would have been there 5 minutes earlier, we would have been right in the middle of that big gunfight. So that was pretty wild.
I mean, the only bodies I've seen in the streets has been in Mexico, and that's been like four times. So
yeah, it's there's a book by a big wave surfer called his name's Laird Hamilton, and this book is called Life Rider, and I it's the best thing I've ever read in relation to that America and a lot of other kind of wealthier countries, I guess we do our absolute best to hide death from the general public.
it's true.
We don't want people to see that you can die, and we don't want that on people's minds, because then how do you convince a person that it's in their best interest to work a job they hate for 40 years so that they may get a 401k and a pension to go live out their golden years if they believe that death is around the corner all the time?
Yeah.
So, but in some of these other countries, death isn't something that they hide. It's not, they're not rushing to throw a sheet over somebody and get them in an ambulance so that nobody sees it. It's just, it's part of life. People live, people die.
Yeah.
And so
it's a great point.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how other cultures approach death.
Yeah. I agree. And I never thought about it like that.
Mm-hmm.
So nothing crazy got you out of South Africa, not like the Zielke or anything.
No, just running out of money like usual.
There you go.
I had to go home and make a few bucks.
A lot of these places you didn't get paid, right?
Mm-mm.
So there's only one place, or
I got paid in Australia.
Uh-huh.
I had a visa that allowed that. Everywhere else, I was on a tourist visa, so legally, I couldn't get paid. In Sweden, I'd get like pocket money basically for helping, but yeah, for the most part, it was just working for food and board.
So how did you afford this? I mean, the flights alone are pretty expensive.
Right. I'd go back. So every time when I'm going back to the U.S., I would just go back to the ranch in Wyoming, and I'd work for a summer or a calving season or something like that, and save up $2,000 to $3,000, which that was enough to buy my round trip flight. And I generally knew that once I got there, I wasn't really going to spend much money because I was working for room and board. So I would try and go there with a little bit of a cushion and enough to get my flights there and back. But it was for sure on a very tight shoestring budget.
Yes.
There was no luxuries with any of it.
Yeah. I mean, and we're not going to give away a lot of the book stuff, but I mean, there are some times where you lost your money.
Yes.
All of it. And,
against my will.
Yes. Yeah. And so, I mean, that I can imagine just being there and not knowing what to do, not having anybody to be able to send you money.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you're just like, oh, shit, now what?
Yeah.
So got to read the book to hear some of this stuff. And I don't know, where are we at now? So we're back in the United States. You've got a little bit of money back, and you're going to go traveling again. Where's next?
The next place I went after that was Mexico.
Okay.
And I mostly went, I didn't really need to check off North America, but I just wanted to see it. And at that point, my Spanish was at a place where I felt a little bit more comfortable being down there. So I went down for 2 months.
Where'd you go?
Chihuahua.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's kind of a crazy story how I got down there, because when I spent a week in Rome just because I wanted to see it.
Yeah. I mean, why not?
Way cool. And when I was there in Sweden, they said, well, why don't you take a week or two off and go see some other stuff? We're not that busy. So I went to Barcelona for a week, and then I went to Rome for a week just being a tourist walking around.
Did you take the trains?
I don't think I took any trains.
Oh, I love the trains in Europe. It's so easy to get around.
Pretty sure I just took like Ryanair, super cheap flights.
Yeah, they do have good cheap flights too because everything's so spread out. I mean,
Right.
it's not huge, but everything's so spread out. They'll fly or take a train.
Right.
And yeah.
Yeah, but when I was in Rome, the place I stayed was a hostel that was like the main floor was a restaurant, and there was 3 floors of rooms above it, and then the basement was a nightclub. And I was down in that nightclub one night, and everybody's dancing. It's like 4 o'clock in the morning, and this guy walks by and grabs this Italian girl and leaves,
Mm-hmm.
like gropes her, and she turns around and there was a guy standing right next to me, and we were behind this. And the guy standing right next to me, she turned and looked right at him, and he had done nothing wrong.
Yeah.
But she threw her drink in his face and smacked him. And I'm sitting there giggling because I'd seen the whole thing happen. And I turned to this guy and I go, man, I'm sorry, I shouldn't be laughing, but I know you didn't do nothing wrong. I saw the whole thing, so that it was just wrong place, right
Yeah.
time. And so we get to talking. It turns out this guy's a Mexican, and I was like, man, never would have thought I'd met a Mexican in Rome, of
Yeah.
all places. And he was going to Arizona State and was just traveling around with some friends. And he said, well, why are you in Europe? And I said, I've been traveling around the world working on ranches and stuff. And he said, well, my dad's got a big ranch in Mexico if you ever feel like going. And I
Wow.
was like, cool. Well,
Yeah.
and so we exchanged contact info, and it was about a year after that I just messaged him one day and I said, hey, is that offer still open for me to go down and see your family's ranch? And he lined it all up for me, and so I went to Mexico.
Wow. Isn't it crazy how stuff like that works out?
Yeah. Yeah, you never know who's got connections to what or where it's
Yeah.
going to lead to.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, I want to hear about Mexico, and I want to hear about the shooting because we got to at least give them that, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But let's check in. Do you have any questions yet?
I do. Yes.
Okay, let's take some questions.
Well, let's see here. I gotta
Guys,
scroll
thanks
down.
for being here and watching with us tonight, and we'll see if we can answer some of your questions.
Let's see the first question here. Well, this one is about hats, so we're gonna.
Well, let's ask him what hat he's wearing. How about
Oh,
that?
yeah, we can do that.
What are you wearing there, bud?
This hat was made for me by Samson Moss,
Mhm.
Prairie Wind Hat Works. He's out of Pincher Creek, Alberta, and it's my favorite hat that I've ever owned.
Yeah.
But it's a black cherry.
Mhm.
I don't even know what the blend is, to be honest. We were talking about it before. I'm not a huge hat guy.
Yeah.
I mean, I wear them all the time. I just don't know the details really.
Yeah.
But it's a really cool hat that he sent me. It's the same. Samson has started making hats for a lot of my friends and stuff. They're just good, like using working cowboy hats.
Yeah, we talked about this because we were talking about this last week, and you told me this is the same hat that the Coulter wears.
Mm-hmm. Same, yeah. Samson makes all his hats as well.
Well, and I had commented on his hat in the Dale Brisby podcast that he did, which you make a guest appearance in that.
Yeah.
But his hat looks fantastic with that ribbon on there, and so does yours. But you that's when you told me that Samson had done his hat too. So
Mm-hmm.
that was a little bit of trivia.
Yeah.
So I have the question here. By the way, guys, if you haven't liked the stream, remember to do so.
Yes.
Our friend Daniel Estrada was reminding everyone to don't forget to hit that
That
like button.
Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you, Daniel. We appreciate that.
And
It
he
costs
also,
you-
sorry, what?
I was just going to say, it costs you nothing. It helps us a lot. So please hit the like.
He actually says gonna have to get the audiobook so I can listen to it on my drive back and forth and from work. That's a
Yes.
good idea.
It is. We listened to the audiobook all the way back from Turkey. And then I think I told you this. I started listening to it in Turkey because we were really busy when we were there.
Mm-hmm.
I would listen to it as I was going to sleep, and I had some crazy dreams. and I blame your book.
Yeah, they might do that. Maybe
Yeah.
some side effects.
Yeah.
He was dreaming with green ants and crocodile.
Yeah.
So Jeff Swain, who is a member, asks,
Hey, Jeff.
so jealous of the experience. Very cool that you wrote the stories down. What was the favorite spot to cowboy and the least favorite?
Mm. Yeah, that's I get asked that somewhat regularly, and the best I can explain is it's like asking a parent their favorite child. It's they're all great in their own ways. I really liked Mongolia a lot. We haven't talked about that yet, but the reason I liked
Oh, we're gonna get
Mongolia
there.
is it's like Wyoming and Montana 200 years ago.
Yeah.
No fences, just go where you want, do whatever you want, and so it really felt like stepping back in time to me. So I really enjoyed Mongolia, and I also really enjoyed the culture in Argentina. Those are probably my top two. Um, I don't know that I have a least favorite. I mean, Sweden was probably the least wild,
Yeah.
for sure.
I can imagine.
Yeah, I just don't have a ton of wild stories from there, but I don't regret that in the slightest. I still learned a bunch while I was down there in Sweden or up there in Sweden, so it was good, but probably the least story worthy,
Yeah.
I guess.
Is it the shortest chapter in the book?
Yes, I think it's the shortest chapter. Yeah.
There you go. And Biff Wellington
Hey,
asks,
Jeff.
how does JB keep his stock tanks from freezing over?
Ooh. Well, in Wyoming, so a lot of people have automatic waterers they're buried really deep, and so there's not a ton of water in them to freeze in the first place. So
Mhm.
most people up north will have something like that, or live water, like on my grandpa's place. Everything that the cattle water out of is a stream
Yeah.
or some kind of moving water that generally doesn't freeze. So I wish I had some great tricks. And I hear about all these things with basketballs and jugs of water full or jugs full of salt water and things
Yeah.
like that. And they might. I'm sure they do work, but just in my experience working up north, almost every place I've ever worked has had set up water tanks that are built for the cold, or tank heaters too.
Yeah.
Just plug them in and keeps the water somewhat thawed in some places. But there's still mornings of just going out there with an axe and busting it open. So
That sounds like a lot of fun.
it's a ton of fun. But I unfortunately don't have any like great tricks. It's just moving water or very little at a high capacity to refill. I
Right.
guess is how we do it.
All right, this one is a comment. Vox Guitars Rock says, I had a friend who hit the guide wire from a telephone pole while riding his snowmobile around 50 miles per hour.
Oh,
Hit him right under the helmet, and someone survived.
wow. I mean, I can't even imagine how that.
That's terrifying.
Yeah, it is.
It's a good way to lose your head.
Yes.
Yep.
So, glad he's okay.
Yeah.
This next question is by John Boy Z. Hello, JB. Do you know any Zielke? I can spell it out for you. Zuelhke apostrophe S. I don't know if that's a last name or.
Is it because his name is close to that?
Probably.
I'm not sure. I mean, that doesn't ring a bell to me. I don't know.
We're just talking about the origin of your last name before the podcast.
Yeah.
My last name that I have no idea where it came from. I'm very Irish, and my last name is, I think, German. So
Yeah.
I'm not entirely sure where it came from.
Should get a 21andMe. Is that what it's called?
Yeah, that's my brother got one, and we're 90% Irish. So, so it's a great question where the last name. I've never even met another Zielke besides my immediate family.
All right, let's take one more, then we'll get back to his story, and we'll take some after that.
Well, I don't have any other. Well,
Nope.
they're asking if you wear starched jeans.
Let's plug the jeans.
Yeah, I don't starch my jeans because I live in a van, and I just I don't have the place to starch them myself, and I very rarely am in a town long enough to take them to a dry cleaner.
Right.
When I was rodeoing, I used to get my jeans starched all the time, or I'd get them done during the week and then take them out when I was on the road. But my life is just it doesn't really allow for that. But I love wearing starched jeans. I did for a long time, and it's I wish I could.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just recently I was up at Steamboat Music Fest, and Rock and Roll Denim hooked us up, me and some of my friends, and they hooked up all the artists that played that festival with jeans, and so these have held up pretty good so far. I've got a few pair of these rock and rolls, so
Yeah.
so
Nice.
far so good.
I have a question, and this comes from me.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So while you were in Australia, they called you Texas.
Oh,
Yes.
that's right.
Did you ever think of, actually adopting that nickname
Yeah.
or going by but having another name other than your name?
Good question.
Yeah, the Texas nickname was kind of forced on me. I had no say in that. I tried correcting them for about 2 weeks, and it just stuck. So I just let it go. But Texas is famous worldwide,
Yeah.
and so
Oh, yeah.
people in other countries, I would also get asked if I know Eminem or George Strait
Okay.
pretty
Of course.
regularly. So it was.
That's reasonable.
I think it was just, Texas is probably arguably the most famous state, or one of them. New York, Texas,
Yeah.
California, people know all those. And so when I was in Australia, and they would say, "Oh, an American cowboy, you must be from Texas."
Yeah.
So that's what they called me down there. They had never heard of Wyoming,
Texas from Wyoming.
but I mean, I feel like there's plenty of Americans that probably haven't heard of Wyoming either. So I didn't blame them, but I don't think I've ever acquired any other nicknames. Honestly, there's probably things that people call me when I'm not around.
Yeah.
I'm
That's
sure.
how it works, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
All right. So Mexico. Going to your buddy's cattle ranch down there, and in Chihuahua.
Mhm.
Let's hear it. How'd that go?
It was pretty good. It was kind of unfortunate timing for me because that family had recently sold all their cattle right before I
Oh,
got
yeah?
there. So when I got down there, they were just starting into corn harvest, and so really I was doing a lot more farming than ranching with that family. So I helped them harvest all the corn. They had big apple orchards as well, and so they did a lot of work with that. But they would, whenever it was possible, they were well aware that I was coming down there because I wanted to be around the cattle and horses and stuff. So whenever somebody offered a neighbor or something that wanted me to come day work, they would let me. It was no issue at all. I would just quit the corn crew, and I'd go work on these ranches next door and help them move cows around and stuff. But it was really cool to see. Mexico's not all that different than what we do here in the United States. It just generally is. It's just done with a lot less money, and
Yeah.
and they just make it work with what they've got. So like for example, when I was on this corn harvest crew in the States, you can go when you got to grease a piece of equipment, you can just go to the store and buy a tube of preloaded grease, stick it in a grease gun, grease your machine. Down there, they didn't have grease tubes. They just had a great big 10-gallon bucket of grease. So it was my job every morning to go find a strong corn stalk and use that to scoop the grease out of the pail and stick it into this tube one stalk load at a time and fill up the tube that way.
Yeah.
Or even like greasing the chains on their machine, like up here back home we use like just spray out of a can.
Yeah.
They would just drip diesel fuel on their chains and stuff to keep them lubricated. So it all worked. It was cool to see that you don't need all the nice things that we have to get the same thing done.
Well, what I've found, and Lorena will attest to this, is we've made things a lot easier for ourselves in this country, right? And a lot of other countries, they don't have that kind of convenient type stuff, right?
Right.
That spray lithium grease is convenient.
Right.
And so there's a lot of that in our culture.
Mhm.
And like there's some things you've seen here that you're like, what do you even need that for? But that's cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it is also, you kind of read my mind because I was thinking about asking you that question. What were the big differences that you saw between Mexican cowboys and yourself? So, yes, in Mexico, we see a problem, we solve it. It is
Mhm.
called Mexican ingenuity.
That's exactly what it is. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. They, like the saddle I rode most of the time I was down there, the tree was broken completely in half.
Well, we kind of glossed over the fact that you made your own saddle in Argentina.
Oh,
But
yeah.
read the book. You're going to hear about that. It's crazy.
Yeah. Use some ratchet strap the saddle onto a horse in Argentina. Yeah.
But broken tree.
Yeah. I hopped on this, I went to go help the neighbors and they said, well, that's your horse. It was this nice little gray colt that I was riding, and I got on and I looked down and I thought, am I that crooked or what's going on here? And then as I started riding, the whole saddle was just doing this. So it was broke in half. Clearly somebody had roped something way too big and strong and just snapped the saddle. But it still worked for what I needed it for.
Right.
But it was, they just made it work. Like if there was a problem, there wasn't, I'm going to the store to buy something to fix this. They built their own stuff and they were just had a lot of ingenuity about how they went about things. And there was also, it's kind of, kind of a lack of safety, I guess.
Oh, yes. Oh,
Like
yeah.
we had to pour some concrete around a water tank while I was down there. And, I'm used to just going and buying bags of Quickcrete.
Mm-hmm.
But they would just buy the cement powder and then they had gravel already there that they had piled up. And then we would shovel it into a little mixer. But the mixer had no switch on it. And so the only way to turn it on and off was to plug it in and unplug it.
Yeah.
But the plug was in the house that was, pretty far away. And so these guys, and the other end of the plug was just two bare wires.
Yeah.
And so those guys would just twist it on and twist it off. So you're running this machine with, 110 bare wires, a few inches from your hand.
I've seen it.
Move wrong, you're going to get
Yeah.
a good zap.
I mean, my first trip to Mexico, and I was always going to all these places for a job, right? We were working for different companies, and they were erecting heavy equipment, and some of the workers had needed an extension cord, and they took speaker wire.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I mean, like it's speaker wire that they have just made an extension cord out of.
Right.
And I mean, this is crazy. Like
Yeah.
stuff like that is just super common.
Yeah, regular. They don't
Yeah.
even think twice about
Nope.
that kind of stuff. So, it carried into the ranching as well. We did a lot of a lot of those ranchers down there that didn't own enough land to have a bunch of cattle would just lease chunks of ground from people, whether it was corn stalks or pasture or whatever. But a lot of those pieces of ground didn't have fence built around them. So I did a lot of temporary electric fence building, and that was some old half broken car battery and half of a solar panel that who knows where it had come off of, but they had somehow wired it all together where it would still zap you and it still worked. So, it was a lot of that.
I was just about to ask about the power because, even in the large cities, the power grid is not very good.
No.
Right. So how is it out in kind of the sticks?
Yeah, it was. I think it went out pretty regular. I don't really remember that well.
It's a thing. It is.
Yeah,
If it rains, you're done.
Powers. Well, I mean, you also look at a power pole in Mexico, and it's just like a bird's nest of.
Oh,
who
yeah.
knows who stuck those wires there? It could have been the government, or it could have been your neighbor. that
Yeah.
just
I mean,
wanted
if
to plug
you guys
in.
haven't seen it, it's amazing. Like it's a different culture, right?
Yeah.
It's a different way of doing things.
So I could see, that bird's nest gets wet. I could understand that the power probably goes out.
Right. All right. So you're day working, and working on a corn ranch or a corn farm.
Corn farm, yeah. And that was That was pretty much every day what we would do. I would do my best to try and find ranch work, just to avoid the farming. I'd never been around corn
Hmm.
till I went down there. I didn't know that I was very allergic to the dust.
Is that right?
Yeah, so
Interesting.
it's that I like could hardly be around that harvester without, and they don't have N95 masks
Right. And
lying around.
they don't have Zyrtec either.
No, none of that. So I would just bring an extra pearl snap with me and tie it around my face while I was working, and that helped some. But it was pretty miserable being around that dusty harvesting. So at any chance I got to go work cattle, I would. I did get to go in one of the cooler things I did down there is they have the cabalgata. Is that what you call them?
Cabalgata.
The parades that they do,
Yes.
and they basically start in the next town over for their local rodeo, and it would be, I don't know, 10, 15, 20 guys horseback would trailer there, and usually they would have their like 10-year-old son driving the trailer down the road, drop their dad off, and then drive home. And we get
No big
8,
deal.
9 in the morning. Yeah, nobody really cared about driver's licenses down there, and we started this parade, and these guys immediately are into the tequila, and it's a party. You
Yeah.
just ride all day horseback to the next town over, and as you go, you pass all these little ranches along the way, and each one you pass, another bunch of cowboys join in, and it turns into, by the time we got to the rodeo grounds, there's probably 200 people horseback just riding along, and you'd end up there, get off. All the wives had cooked up a big feed, and we'd eat and then watch the rodeo that evening. But that was a lot of fun because it was all day horseback, and at the front they had a mariachi band playing on a trailer, and then behind that they had a trailer that was just full of coolers full of Tecate. And so you could ride up there with 10 pesos and never get off your horse, never stop moving.
Right.
Just hand it to them on the trailer, and they'd hand you a beer back, and you go back to your spot in line. And it was good. I actually drummed up quite a bit of day work during that parade, just riding around talking to. It didn't take them. Yeah, I don't know that there'd been a whole lot of gringos through that town in a very long time, so I stuck out like a sore thumb. So everybody, I'd ride around, hey, gringo, everybody. So they knew who I was. And so I'd go talk to them, and they were all very friendly. And I'd ask, are you doing anything with cattle anytime soon? And so I'd get some work for the neighbor or something in the middle of a parade. So that was a lot of fun.
I was just going to ask you what they called you there. So I guess it's gringo.
Gringo. Yeah. That was pretty much all I got called. I don't know that anybody ever learned my name down there.
Did you ever learn dancing in Mexico?
Some like I went to a couple of these little local bars where they're doing the cumbia and stuff like that, and I had an interesting experience in one of those bars where we went in, and it was just all old ranchers, and then the crew that I worked with.
What do you call those where it's just the old guys?
The place?
Cantina, right?
Cantina.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's what it was, really the only bar in town, and we went there one night, and it was all these old guys, and then there's about 5 or 6 young pretty girls in there.
Mm-hmm.
And it just seemed odd to me that they would be hanging out, and they weren't with anybody. They were walking around talking to everybody. And this girl kept coming up and asking me for cigarettes, and I always would give her one. I didn't think twice about it, and she'd ask me for a beer, so I'd pay 50 cents or whatever it was for a beer. And I finally ran out of cigarettes at the end of the night, and so I went to her and I said, hey, I saw she had a pack with her, and so I said, could I have one of your cigarettes? And she said, no. I thought, well, that's rude.
Yeah.
And so we went home that night, and my friend who had taken me there that I worked with the next day, he's like, you want to go back to the bar again tonight? And I said, well, maybe if you want to go. He's like, yeah, let's go visit the prostitutes again. And I said, prostitutes? And he said, yeah, you didn't see them? I said, so all those girls? And then it all kind of started to click. I was like, oh, that's why all these young, pretty ladies were in this bar just full of old cowboys.
Right.
And so that was an interesting bar. There was a lot of illegal things happening in that place, but
Yeah.
we had fun.
Yeah. Well, that's a common theme throughout the book is rodeos and bars.
Mhm.
And you guys are gonna have to read it to get a lot of the good details. But I mean, it's just chock. The book is chock full of cool stuff and crazy stuff too, right?
Right. Yeah, that's right.
But we are going to talk about getting shot at, or maybe not getting caught in the middle of a gunfight in Mexico, right?
Yeah, so that was I was hanging out after work one day with the young guys that I worked with, and we're sitting on the top of this hill, and we were just talking about life, and I was asking them, what do they want to do, and this guy wants to be a butcher, and this guy wants to go to the States and build houses, and they were just we're talking about our futures, and um, my cell phone didn't work while I was down there, and so one of the guys I was with got a call from our boss, and we're just drinking beers on the top of this big hill that overlooks the town that we lived in, and down below us there'd been some kind of celebration going on and fireworks going off and stuff, and didn't think much of it. We had this band. We would listen to this band all the time, Tercer Elemento, and so we had that cranked up, and we're just drinking beer, not paying attention, and uh, the boss calls and he goes, "You got the gringo with you?" And he said, "Yeah, why?" And he said, "Get him home right now." And I mean, now. So we didn't understand why that was, but he knew something that we didn't.
Yeah.
And so they take me home, and we're flying through the streets in this, old beat up, I think it was a stolen Tahoe because it still had
Stolen.
Texas. Most of the cars in that town still had either Arizona or Texas plates on them.
Right.
And so I think, I don't know who those belong to, but it was his Tahoe. So we're flying through the streets, and there's chickens and dogs and stuff running around. And,
Yes, that's common too.
we get home, and I walk in the house, and I was living with my boss's mother, was probably 80. And I get in the front door, and she's trying to lock the door behind me, and her hands are shaking so bad she can't lock the door.
Yeah.
So I turned around and I locked it for her, and I said, "What's wrong?" And she said, "Well, don't you hear what's going on outside?" And it didn't click until then that was not a celebration, and that was not fireworks. That was a gunfight starting.
Right.
And so she said, she was pretty worried about it, and she said, "Go back to your room and lay below the windows so you don't catch a stray bullet, and everything should be fine." And I feel like I understand most conversations in Spanish at this point, but this seemed pretty serious, and I thought I better check if this is for real. So my boss's daughter spoke Spanish, Italian, German, English, and I think another language, but her English was really good.
Right.
So I text her, and I said, I just want to check that I'm understanding this correctly. This is a big gunfight happening in the street right now. And she said, "Yes, listen to Abuela.
Yeah.
Do what she says." And I said, "Okay. So is there just going to be like bodies everywhere in the morning?" And she said, "No, they're efficient," I think is what she said. And she said, we're done talking about this."
Okay.
And I said, "Okay." So I laid that. I think that that kind of attitude helped me a lot in Mexico,
Right.
because that would happen sometimes where people are like, "That's not how this works," or, "Just so you know, this is happening. We're not talking about this anymore."
Really?
End of conversation.
Interesting.
And so that's I would just leave it at that, because I knew it was probably stuff I didn't want to know anyways, or it would be better if I didn't. So that kind of stuff, I just said, okay.
I'm
So
way too curious for that.
When I was down there, there's a town not that far away called Creel, and it's right. There's a train that goes through there, and a lot of tourists. It's not like Cancun where there's that many tourists, but it's still a tourist destination. It was either the week before or after this gunfight, there was an American who went down there to Creel, and he asked too many questions.
Yeah.
and he ended up in a barrel of acid on
Is
the
that
side of the
right?
road.
Wow.
So they told me that story. I read about it, and then the guys I worked with, they're like, "That's why you don't ask questions."
Yeah. There you go.
So I didn't.
You don't ask questions, but I have one.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
DC asks, have you ever had any trouble with local law enforcement trying to extort you from money? They tend to take advantage of foreigners who are new to the community.
Good question.
Maybe he's talking about Mexico?
Could be anywhere. But
Yeah,
All right.
yeah. That I guess I don't have a. I did see that a lot. When I got robbed in Argentina, we knew the guy that had taken it. It was on camera at this hostel where I had gotten robbed.
Oh, you're gonna have to tell them the story now.
So I was staying in a hostel in Argentina, and there was lock boxes in the rooms where you could put your personal belongings.
Mhm.
They were not very strong. They're just, you put like a little luggage lock on them, basically, so easy to break into.
Right.
When I went to Argentina, I assume it's still the same way, but at that time there was a black rate and a blue rate exchange rate for money.
Yeah.
The black was the official exchange rate. Blue was street value. The blue rate was almost double. So if you brought a bunch of U.S. cash with you, I think at that time it was like $10 was the official exchange rate. You could go to a street vendor and get like 18 or 19 on the dollar. So I had brought about $1,000 cash just to exchange in that way, and I had it hidden in my suitcase. My suitcase was in this lockbox, and I had gone out. We had a 4-person room, and when I left that afternoon, it was me and this beautiful Spanish girl that I had just met there, and we went out to a nightclub together. And we came back to the room, and when we came back, there was a third guy who had checked in that was a local Argentinian guy.
Mhm.
When you check into this hostel, you have to either scan a license or a passport to be there.
Right.
So they knew they had government documents of every person staying there, and we had been at this nightclub all night. So me and her get back, pass out, and when I woke up in the morning, I went to go. I think I was just getting my toothbrush or a change of clothes or something out of my bag, and I realized a lot of stuff had been moved.
Mhm.
And then I thought, well, where's my cash? And so I started digging around in there, and that guy who had moved into our room had woke up before us, gone through my stuff, stole my cash and all of my credit cards out of my bag, and left. And he left all of his stuff there. He left his phone charger and his
Left his
clothes.
stuff?
He left his stuff. And so anyways, I went to the owner of the hostel and I told him what had happened. And they have cameras in that place,
Yeah.
and so they you could see him leaving. They knew his name and everything. And I said, well, can we call the police? And he said, we can if you want to, but you're probably going to have to pay the police about as much as what you've had stolen from you to even interest them enough to go looking for this guy. So I wasn't extorted for money, but they were, unless you pay them, they're not there to help. In Africa, you could kind of do whatever you want if you just gave, if the cops gave you a problem, you just give them cash and they leave you alone. There was a lot of checkpoints in Africa that were that way, that like you'd come up to a checkpoint that was like 55-gallon drums set in the road, and they'd have a chain pulled out or sometimes guns or something like that, and they just, would either be real government officials trying to get money from you, or sometimes they were fake, and they'd say, oh, your car's dirty, we're going to fine you because you got dirt on your car, something like that. And you could try and blow through them. Sometimes that worked, but they sometimes also had stuff set up to either shoot at you or like mess your car up.
Yeah.
So sometimes usually what you do is you keep a wallet with very little money in it and then keep your cash somewhere else. So you pull it out, they see or think that they've got you for all you've got, give it to them, go about your day. So I guess that was about it. But I didn't ever directly have, law enforcement come try and get money from me.
You know what some people do in Mexico to avoid being, I don't know, robbed, I guess, or mugged? They put their money in their shoe.
Yeah, that's actually what saved me in Argentina. Is the only thing I had stuck a debit card under the insole of my shoe, so my cash was gone, but I had that one card, and the
Wow.
only reason I still had it is because it was in my shoe. So
That's
now,
smart.
now when I travel, I always keep
Don't tell them where.
Somewhere.
somewhere.
You're gonna get robbed tomorrow.
Give me those crappy
I'm
vans.
kidding.
I know there's something in them.
It is true. Like
Just
some
kidding.
people even carry two cell phones when they ride the public transportation in Mexico. They carry one in case they get mugged.
Yeah.
It's usually a very cheap cell phone,
Yeah.
and they have it, like in their pockets. And the good one,
Mhm.
they hide it.
Yeah.
Because
That's smart. It happens a lot.
I would just fix the system.
well, that's gonna take a couple of business days.
Yeah.
Right. Huh. All right. So you didn't get shot.
Did not get shot.
Didn't get shot.
But that was the point when I started writing my book that day, or
Yeah.
that night, laying on the floor in Mexico. I thought, well, I could die. Any of this stuff could kill me, so I should probably write it down.
Right.
And so that was the start of, and I honestly, I never intended for it to be a book. I really thought I was gonna die sooner rather than later, and I just wanted the stories written down somewhere. But I didn't believe that I was capable of writing my own book. I just wanted them there, and I thought if something does happen, hopefully somebody will find it compelling enough that they will write the story.
Yeah.
So for a long time, that was my plan, was just to have it written down and stored in a place where if something happened, it was there.
Did you have any help with the writing and any help with the editing? Are you self-published? How did this go about?
Yeah, it's self-published. I wrote the book over 2 calving seasons. And then I edited the book over 2 calving seasons. And I did have I I had some help with the editing, and really I wrote about half of the book, and I'd never met an author before, a published author. And when I did finally meet an author, I asked them for input on what I should be doing, because I had no idea. I'm just writing away.
Yeah.
And they told me that until you have read your book out loud 30 times over, it's not ready for publication. And when they told me that, I just believed that that was the truth. And I thought, I will never do that.
Yeah.
And so I just shelved the book, and I just gave up on it, basically. And I was working out in California kind of during COVID times for some friends that had bought a ranch out there, and they had a nanny essentially that was helping them. And she was a Stanford student, not an English major. She's a biomedical engineer, but very much smarter than me, for sure. And I don't know how, it must have come up at some point in conversation that I had written all this stuff down. And she said, well, would you let me read it? And I said, I guess. Nobody's ever read it before. So I gave her just Word documents, essentially.
Yeah.
And for Christmas that year, she printed out every page and hand bound them together and made me a copy of my book. Or, in my mind, it wasn't a book, but she turned it into a book.
Yeah.
And when I got my hands on it and saw, oh, wow, this could be a book. And it still wasn't even, I hadn't written the whole thing yet. There was still some more writing to do. That kind of rejuvenated me, and I thought, okay, well, I'm going to finish this. She ended up also kind of being my editor as well. So I ran the book a bunch of times through editing software. One was called Hemingway, and it helps with sentence structure. One was called Grammarly, and it just helps with the punctuation and stuff. So that helped me clean it up.
Mm-hmm.
And then I sent it to her, and she did that final editing on it. she doesn't come from a ranching background, so it was really good to have her read through it because things that make sense to a Wyoming ranch kid don't make sense to somebody in LA sometimes. So
True.
she read through it, and there was parts where she goes, I have no idea what you're talking about here. So I had to go back and rewrite it so that the general public could understand it or understand it better. And there was also some stuff in there that she's like, this, it might be normal to say this where you're from, but like somebody from LA might be upset.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like a sensitivity reader, they call it. So she did both of those things and helped me kind of structure it so it made a lot more sense. So definitely, she's not a professional editor, had never edited anything before, has not since, but very smart Stanford. She's now getting her PhD at Princeton.
Okay.
So very, very smart
girl.
Helpful.
Yeah.
And then it's self-published through Amazon, and it's very easy to do nowadays to self-publish.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so there's no publisher involved. It was just all me. I hired a lady that helped me a bunch with. She did the formatting. So when you submit it to Amazon, it has to be in their format that they want it in. So she kind of helped build the cover and format the book. And then the gal that drew the cover art, I've never even met her before, but she was recommended to me through Instagram, and she put that drawing together, which I thought was super cool.
Yeah.
And so that ended up on the cover. But yeah, there's nothing professional about the book. It's all just done.
The foreword by Coulter Wall.
Yep, Coulter wrote the foreword, and Coulter read the foreword in the audiobook. It's him.
Yeah.
I believe he told me that he was just when he was reading it, he was driving down some dirt road and you could just hear a rattling truck. So I had to kind of clean up the audio a little bit, but
that's so funny.
Yeah.
And so cool too, right?
Yeah. I was very thankful that's been super helpful. The fact that he wrote the foreword certainly gets people interested in it, and I'm very grateful that he did that. But I figured, I wanted this book in my mind. I wanted my book to be the modern version of some of these old cowboy books that are out there. And one of my favorite books of all time is We Pointed 'Em North, and it's Teddy Blue Abbott's story. And when you read that book, you kind of feel like you're sitting there at the bar listening to this old timer tell you stories. And that's kind of what I wanted my book to be like. And so I wrote it in that way, and I thought it's kind of like taking the old school, very old school, and making it new and cool.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, there's nobody doing that at a higher level than Coulter Wall, taking these old cowboy songs and stuff and presenting them to new audiences that maybe don't know the first thing about a cowboy, but they're like, wow, that's a cool song. And I kind of hope that the book would do the same thing, that people that know nothing about ranching would pick the book up and maybe learn something about ranching and also be entertained at the same time.
Like, he's got such a unique voice too, right?
Yeah.
Like as soon as the audio started, I didn't expect him to be there, and I'm like, that's Coulter Wall, right? That unmistakable, right?
Yeah.
So
He's
that was
got
really cool.
a generational voice. I
Yeah.
guess. Like there's nobody like him. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. All right, so we're what are we at? Five continents? 5 of 7?
That is, yeah, we just got Mongolia left.
All right. Let's hear it. Mongolia. So, like, I have not had the time. You sent me a picture. I asked for a picture, specific picture of you riding a reindeer in Mongolia.
Right.
And I didn't have time to put it in the stream for you guys.
But you can see it now.
That's right. It's on our Instagram. It's on our Facebook. It's on our YouTube too, right? I think you posted it to YouTube.
Not yet.
Okay. So go check it out. I thought it was Photoshopped. I thought it was AI or something when I first saw it. And I saw it, I think, when I was doing research on you to do the podcast. I Googled, and like that pops up, and I'm like, That's not real.
Yeah, a
That
lot
that
of
is
people
it's
think
not
that.
real.
Yeah.
And then I heard your podcast with Dale Brisby,
Hmm.
and it was real, right?
Yeah.
And then so I can't wait to get to Mongolia in the book and hear the actual story. But let's hear about Mongolia and riding a reindeer.
Yeah. So Asia was the last continent I had to check off. And I thought, well, where in the heck are they ranching in Asia?
Yeah.
I thought maybe they're doing stuff with buffalo in Thailand, or, they farm with them down there, or maybe the Wagyu beef in Japan, something like that. I
Oh, that'd
started
have been
looking
cool too.
around, and one day just randomly a video of these Mongolian guys tripping down a wild horse and jumping on it came up, and I thought, that's where I'm going.
That's it.
So I started looking into Mongolia, and horses are super cheap in Mongolia. You can buy a good broke horse for $500.
Hmm.
And so I started looking into it, and I was like, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go there. I'm going to buy a saddle horse and a pack horse, and I'm just going to ride across the entire country by myself. I'll just buy the gear.
Is that safe?
Yeah, but Mongolia, there's really not any like super dangerous animals there other than the horses and
Yeah.
stuff. But it's not like you're going to get mauled by a grizzly or anything in there. And the people too, the culture, it's fairly peaceful and stuff. So I wasn't really worried about that. Now being way in the middle of nowhere all alone
Oh yeah,
with
it's
two
dangerous enough.
horses, that could be dangerous. But so that was my plan, and I had found this Instagram page. My buddy Eric Cooper, he I had never met him at this point, but he's an American that spends a bunch of time over there in Mongolia. And so I just sent him a DM and I said, "Hey man, I'm gonna go to Mongolia next summer. I've done all this stuff and it's the last thing to check off for me. And I'm just wondering if you have any advice or places I should go, people I should meet while I'm there trying to ride across the country." And he said, "Well, um, I could help you out with that, or I'm planning a trip to go live with the last people on Earth that still ride reindeer as their main source of transportation."
Wow.
And he said, if you want to go on that, it's kind of a tough trip, and you got to know your stuff, because it's not just any tourist can come out here and do it. You got to understand horses, and we're going to be in the back country and all this stuff. But it was pretty expensive. It was going to take pretty much my whole budget to do that.
Hmm.
And I thought, well, gosh, I don't know if I can pass that up, going to ride reindeer. Like, I really want to take the horses, but when will I ever get this chance again? So I told him I agreed to it, and so I switched my plans up, and I said we met up at a certain time, and there's a group of us that went, uh, met up, and then Eric knew some of the locals and had set this up. So we we got in these Russian furgons, which are like a 4-wheel drive minivan.
Okay.
And there's really like one paved highway in Mongolia. There's one city, Ulaanbaatar. That's the capital, and it didn't exist until the Soviet Union made them have a capital. Because up until that point, they just roamed around moving with their livestock, and there was no cities. They were constantly on the move. So the Soviet Union was like, hey, we need a place where we can land planes, have meetings. Like, you can't just be out here roaming around horseback all the time. So they build this city, the only city, Ulaanbaatar, and so now still I think it's like 60, 70, maybe 80% of the country is still nomadic
Really?
and moves around with their livestock. So there's not a ton of people in the city, but there's some. And so we leave out of there. Actually, we took a small plane first to some other little airport, and then we get in these furgons, and there's no paved roads. It's all 2 tracks out, and there's no fences. There's very little private land. It's all, you can go wherever you want, do whatever you want. Don't mess with anybody else. They ain't gonna mess with you.
So are they just sleeping in tents and traveling on the next?
Yeah, they call them gers, is what they call them. People here, I think it's the Russian word for it, a yurt.
Okay, I know.
People,
Yeah, I
they're
know
like
what
a
it is.
canvas tent, basically. But that's what they live out of, all these families. And so we take these 2-track roads. It took us like 2 or 3 days on these in these bouncy old vans going out there, and we get to the end of the road, and we met up with a family there that raised a lot of horses, and it was like a mother and 7 sons or something like that, bunch of boys. And one of the older boys, had married essentially the princess of the reindeer tribe.
Really?
They lived the other side of the mountain range, 4 or 5 days ride the other way. And because they had married into it, they kind of knew where the reindeer tribe would be, because they're nomadic too, moving around.
Yeah.
And they didn't have phones or anything like that. So they had talked to their brother, and he said, at this time, we should be roughly in this valley. So we go with those brothers, saddle up these half-wild Mongolian horses. Like the pack horses, we had to trip down and tie their legs up just so we could pack them. I don't know if they'd ever been handled before.
Really?
They were just completely wild. And the saddle horses were a bit better, but they were still kind of wild. And so we load up all of our stuff and rode for 3, 4, 5 days, something like that, up into these pretty high mountains. And we finally get over the top into the next valley over, and they told us, okay, now we're there. So we don't know where they are, but just start looking for reindeer. If you see them anywhere, they should be close by. So we just kind of rode around in a valley, a great big wide valley right on the Russian border. Just hoping to find reindeer. And we eventually did, and ride into their camp. And the reindeer folks, they didn't live in the gares. They lived in actual teepees.
Mhm.
And those, I mean, they were way, way out there. And so we went and lived with these families for a couple weeks, and it was very like simple, peaceful, and they had no real contact with the outside world, and that the language they spoke was a dying language. Like it, probably in my lifetime, it'll be gone. And the tribe was called Tsaatan. It's Tsaatan. But very cool people, lived off the land entirely, just produced what they needed right there.
What are you guys eating? What's their food?
A lot of their food. So in the summertime, they try not to kill animals, because they're only getting bigger and fatter while there's grass.
Yeah.
So they just live off what the animals produce in the summertime, which is dairy products. And so almost everything we ate was milk, cheese, yogurt, stuff like that. We would occasionally have meat, like they'd butcher a goat or a sheep or something like that sometimes, but that was pretty much it. It was mostly just dairy. And we drank a ton of fermented mare's milk. That was
Really?
that's their traditional drink over there.
How's that?
That was another one of those things that made everybody but me sick.
Oh yeah.
And I didn't mind it. It just kind of tastes like sour milk, but mare's milk is super, super sweet. It's very high in lactose, which lactose is a sugar. So it ferments well, but if you drink it raw, it's like you put a teaspoon of sugar in your glass of milk. It's very sweet. So we'd go out and help milk mares 4 times a day, because they don't have a big udder on them like a cow. So you got to milk them more often. And so we'd go milk mares, or help them milk the mares, and then they'd bring that mare's milk back inside, and they had these, it was 2 goat skins sewed together. It's like a big leather platter. But they don't have refrigeration or electricity, so there's no refrigerating the milk, so you have to ferment it in order for it to stay good for a long time. And
I mean, that makes sense.
yeah, and it was an acquired taste. It would get slightly alcoholic. It was like 5-6%, so it was close to beer.
Yeah.
And that was, every little tent I rode by when I was there, they're not used to seeing a white guy with a beard, and they would just get super excited and invite me to come in, and first thing they do is offer you a bowl of Eric.
Yeah.
And so we drank a lot of that stuff there. But yeah, the reindeer folks were great, and I did some trading with them and stuff. Traded for knives and clothing, and I traded them off stuff I had. I left with a lot of with very little of the stuff I came with.
Mhm.
And I didn't intend to trade it all off, but they really wanted like a hoodie with English writing on it. To them was amazing.
Yeah.
So I traded them
Yeah.
stuff like that, and they loved it. But after that trip ended, I was pretty much out of money, but I had already contacted this company that their whole thing was selling horses to the public. And I had originally talked to them about buying my 2 horses from them to ride across the country. And I told them, I said, hey, look, I don't have the money anymore, but if there's a way I could work for you and just get food and a place to stay, I would love to just help. And so they hired me on basically as kind of an outfitter or a guide. And so I could speak English and I could help facilitate like the tourists coming in and buying horses and stuff. And basically what I would do is I would teach them different knots. I would teach them how to hobble a horse, how to picket them out at night, treat simple like trail wounds and stuff like that. So I basically got these people, gave them like 3 days of instruction of how to live off of a horse. And some of these people knew almost nothing about horses. And then
And they're coming in and buying horses.
and they would buy them. And so I would just after their 3 days, I'd go, here's your horse. Good luck.
Well,
And they would just take off into nothing.
that brings another question, right? So if all of these tourists are coming in and buying a horse, there's got to be a huge market for resell or buying them back, right?
That was their whole business model. So they'd sell you a horse for $500, something like that.
Uh-huh.
And then even if you're gone for like 2 days and you give up and you want to come back, they'll buy them back for $250.
Well,
So it's yours to do whatever you want with, but most people there don't know what to do with it. So they
Yeah.
would bring them right back to those people and sell
Yeah.
them back at $250. So it was kind of just renting the horse, but if you never brought it back, it wasn't their problem.
I mean, that's a pretty good price, $250 to rent a horse for as long as you want,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then you get,
Yeah.
well, it's 500, but you get 250 back.
Right.
So, I mean, that's pretty good.
Pretty dang good. And that company always had at least one person that spoke English that could, it would be very difficult to do without a translator or a company like that. If you just wanted, you could pull off, you can show up in Mongolia, head 2 miles outside of Ulaanbaatar, and you will see a herd of 1,000 horses. You could ride right up to those people and just hold cash out and say, give me 2 horses. But it would just be a lot more difficult because that Mongolian is such a hard language. It's very weird and different and ancient. So without a translator, that would be tough.
I mean, I'd love to go see that. That'd be probably pretty cool.
Hell yeah, let's go ride a reindeer. Yeah.
So what was it like riding a reindeer?
They're the smoothest animal I've ever ridden.
Yeah.
They're not fast. They're not powerful. You're not cutting a cow out of a herd with one of those or anything. But it's just more convenient than walking, basically. But they it was like just moving on glass. Like they didn't hardly move underneath you. And the coolest thing about them is they have great big feet on them. But like I rode the bull reindeer, the biggest one they had.
And the antlers were huge.
Huge. But they're only, maybe 3.5, 4 feet tall. They're not that big.
Yeah, it looks like you could have just stood up.
Yeah, you're not far off of it. I mean, they're not very big animals. You can't ride them as far or as fast as a horse. It's pretty slow going and easy. But so the cool thing about them was their feet are huge, and so it's pretty. I don't know about here in Texas, but like up north, we've got bogs up there that if you ride a horse into the wrong bog, I've done it before. You'll sink a horse to where all you can see is its head and maybe your saddle horn. I mean, they just fall. It's like quicksand.
Yeah, really.
And there's a lot of that in Mongolia too. And so stuff that you would never even dream about trying to ride your horse across because it's too muddy and boggy. Those reindeer would just walk right across it because their feet were huge and they could just float across the top of it.
Just floating across.
Yeah.
6x6.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Turbo.
Didn't bother him one bit. So it was pretty cool to see.
So, I mean, you saw reindeer at the Drover last year. It
I
the
was
first time.
ecstatic.
Yeah. And I don't know if it's the same. I don't know if it's the same kind of reindeer. North American reindeer or whatever is the same as Mongolian reindeer, but they're pretty small animals.
Yeah, they're not very big. I would guess that bull reindeer I was riding probably weighed 400 or 500 pounds.
Yeah.
So not very big, but they like in Sweden they have reindeer as well. Those reindeer are way smaller
Yeah.
than the Mongolian ones. So I
Okay.
think there are kind of different types of them.
Did you ever see them shedding their antlers?
Oh yeah, good question.
I wasn't there at the right time for that, but I get asked a lot about when you're riding a reindeer, do their horns come around and hit you? Because they're great big and they're right in front of you. If you look at the pictures from Mongolia, you can see that reindeer is in full velvet, so its
Yes.
horns are still growing. I didn't know this until I got around those reindeer, or I suppose this is true for elk, deer, and anything that has velvet. That velvet is incredibly sensitive, and so if you just go up and blow on one of their antlers, they'll pull away from it. So they do not want to touch anything with their antlers. So I never got to ride one after they had shed the velvet. So maybe they would knock you at that point, but when I was there, they wouldn't even come close to touching you with their horns while you're riding them. And then they would shed them later in the year, and then those families would pick them all up and turn them into tools, knives, all that. So they used every bit of what those animals produced.
And did you ever, or do you have something? Well, I guess the question is, did you bring anything with you from, all of your trips? Is there something that you have, like a token of, or something that you cherish from your trips?
Yeah, so in Mongolia, I traded some stuff for. They made some of the knives that they made out of the reindeer antlers. But the coolest thing that I got probably anywhere in my travels, and it just so happened to be towards the end of Mongolia, I that group of brothers that we rode with, their uncle also came along, and their uncle was maybe 45 or 50, and he was a real quiet guy. He never said much, but he was always at the very front and kind of leading the group where we were going. And I had a pretty fast horse the whole time I was there, and so I would always end up in the front with him. And we could never talk or anything like that, but he'd point things out, and we got to be pretty good buddies. On the way back, I had brought a bunch of just little folding pocket knives with me, just to trade off or give to people to say thank you. And as we were coming down out of the mountains, I knew we were getting close to being done, so I reached into my pack and got one of these knives out, and I gave it to Uncle. And he was very happy about it, and we get down, and one of the last things we had to do was cross this great big deep fast moving river, so you're like waist deep sitting on your horse soaking wet, and we crossed the river and we get out the other side, and we just stopped and everybody got off and just kind of laid out in the sun and dried off, let the horses have a break. Uncle hopped on his horse and told somebody he was going to be right back, and just goes flying off into the distance, out of sight. He comes back maybe 15 or 20 minutes later, and in Mongolia they touch their forehead. This means thank you. And so he had done that a bunch of times when I gave him the knife. And he came back and he held his hands out like this, like he had a gift for me. And I opened my hands, and he just set this a little bone in my hand. And I didn't know what it was, and I just said thank you. And we had a translator with us, and I went up to the translator and I said, what is this that Uncle just gave me? And he said what he had given me was a wolf ankle bone. And ankle bones in Mongolian culture are super powerful. And they play, like they say, rolling the bones. They play a game like dice where they roll like camel and horse and goat and sheep ankle bones. And it's like playing dice. Well, the wolf ankle bone is the most powerful and most sought after bone that you can get, and they're very rare because wolves are not easy to find in Mongolia anymore. So Uncle had been keeping this at his house, and he rode all the way back to his tent, ran on his horse, got this and brought it back to me. And they say that those ankle bones protect everything above them. So you're supposed to put them on you and like tie it to your boot or even your belt loop. And in theory, everything above it is protected, but it's supposed to be big medicine, very powerful.
Wow.
And so I still have that, and that was probably one of my favorite things that I ever got, as far as like a little token like that.
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever carry it with you?
I used to carry it with me a lot, and then I started to get worried that I might lose it,
Yeah.
and so it's in a safe now. I don't ever want to lose
Yes.
That's so cool. I collect rocks.
Yes. And dream catchers.
Yeah. But there's something so special about gifting
Mhm.
someone, something. And not only the object per se, but the energy and the
Yeah.
intention that that person,
Absolutely.
puts in it.
Mhm.
So that's very cool.
Yeah, that was. I got other little gifts when I was out and about, but that one for sure was the most special. The one, well, I'll keep that till the day I die.
Awesome.
All right. So how do you leave Mongolia? Did you just time there's done and you go back? You didn't get sick there?
No sickness in
Okay.
Mongolia. Yeah, I just kind of filled out my time, and I just rode and rode and rode. I rode holes in my legs. I've got big scars on my
Yeah.
calves from. I rode a lot of weird saddles all over the world.
Yes.
And they generally didn't fit that well, or the way that I rode wasn't the way that they were supposed to be rode in. And so my legs are all scarred up from riding, and I stayed there until I got really where I was pretty much out of money, and I just was kind of felt like I had my fill. And I had a friend stationed in south of Seoul, South Korea. She was in the Air Force over there, and she had invited me. She said, "Well, you're this close. You probably have a layover in Seoul.
Why not?
So stop." So I went and spent a week-ish, maybe 2 weeks in Seoul, and I was finally back into like a civilization at that point. So I mostly just kind of rested and ate really good food in Korea, and then I came back to the U.S. and I had every intention of going back to Mongolia, and then COVID happened, and so I had the flights bought, I had everything planned, and uh, that was probably mid 2019
Yeah.
when I did all that, and then COVID happened, so I had to go try and get all my money back for all that and stuff. But that kind of capped off at least the journey that's in the book. That's where it ends.
That's where the book ends, but your journey continues.
Yeah, I once I started writing, or once the book was done, and it just needed some design work done and stuff. Basically, my part of it was done, and there was nothing I could do. I needed something to pour my creative energy into, and that turned into Dusty Vaquero. So the next chapter, I guess, of my life was moving into the music industry and video and all that stuff. So now I just live out of my minivan, driving around the Western United States, shooting music videos and helping my friends on their ranches and
Yeah.
doing book signings and speaking at events. I'm always tickled when people call and want me to come talk to a group of people or whatever. And I've emceed some music festivals and things like that because of my tie to both of them. But now it's just planning out this music festival is kind of brings us up to where we are now.
Well, I mean, the music festival is fantastic. We're going to try to be there.
Mhm.
Oh yeah.
If we can make it happen at all, we're coming up there. I think it'll be really cool. So, a couple of questions.
Mhm.
You're a little older now. Would you have done anything, or would you do anything differently now than
No.
no?
Well, would I change it, or if I did it again, would I change
If
it?
you had, okay, so at this point in your life, if you were to do it now,
Mhm.
what would you do differently?
I probably wouldn't take quite as many risks as I had the first time around. you don't know what you don't know. And I
Yeah.
don't regret doing any of the stuff that I did, but now I'm a little bit more seasoned when it comes to the traveling and planning things like that. So if I was gonna do it again, and I intend to, I think I will do a second lap, and
Really?
but it won't be the same countries.
All right.
I'd like to go back and hit every continent, different country, and do it again. But I think I want to do it with a film crew if I do it
All
and document the whole thing that way.
right, we're in.
I was just gonna say, somebody please call Netflix because this book right here needs to be
Yeah. It's a
like,
it's a
yeah,
it's a
yes,
great book, guys, and I'm
yes.
telling you, go pick it up or go buy the audio book. It's just really good. It's really good. So, let's see. Where are we at? We got
2 hours and 24 minutes.
you got questions?
Many, but I mean, we'll be here all night. I mean, I just want to say it's been great meeting you. Your book is really good. You know what they say? Plant a tree, write a book, and have a kid. So I guess, you've done one of those too. No?
Right.
Yeah,
I don't know
there
if
you
you've already planted a tree. Probably you have, but
Yeah.
now you just need to get the kid. And it's funny how all of these stories just intertwine and how people meet. And one of the things that I've enjoyed about the book is that it's it's you going to all of these places and cultural differences, and I guess that going to all of those countries, you've realized that, and maybe you've learned to value the things because just a minute ago you were talking about I ate all of this good food, and I rested, and then what are some of the things that you learned about that, like things that you have here, but then maybe you thought, oh, I really miss them all away.
Yeah, well, I think the biggest thing that's evident in my everyday life now is that traveling all around and living with a lot less than people think that you need, at least what Americans think is like, I need this, but it turns out you really don't. I I live my entire life fits into a carry-on bag. I have like four shirts, couple pairs of pants, set of riding boots, some sneakers that I wear around. And then I've got my camera equipment, but I live out of my van. And people always think like, wow, that's got to be tough. But if you've seen how other people live and how little you really need to be happy, I'm just not really a collector of a lot of things. So I guess I'm just a minimalist, I guess you could say. But it comes from seeing that, you really don't need that much to go. And there's a saying that, those who go the furthest pack the lightest. You can go a long ways if you don't have to carry a big load with you. And so my life is pretty simple in that way. I just value experiences a lot more than things. So that's something I took from traveling. I really don't need much at all to get by and to be happy and to have fun. But also, being out there, just the convenience of there being fast food around the,
Yeah.
not having to eat noodles and unseasoned meat for every meal, or stuff like that. You take that for granted, the fact that you can just go buy all this stuff that you don't really need, or
Yeah.
food that you don't have to prepare. People are buying food every day that they have no idea where it even comes from. They don't know
True.
where the meat comes from. They don't know how the corn is harvested. They don't even know what a soybean looks like. Things like that. So it's um, we take a lot of that for granted, and I don't know. I like to live a simple life with not too many things, and everything's got its place, and I've got just what I need and no more than that.
Well, we got a Cowboy Cartel T-shirt for you tonight.
Oh,
That's right.
perfect.
Yeah, I'm supposed to have that
some
over
other
here.
goodies.
I'm supposed to have that over here, but
Don't worry.
I forgot about it. We've been gone a couple of weeks, right? So, we were I guess we were just gone a week, right? No, we had a live video premiere, and then we were gone in Turkey. So we've been gone a couple of weeks. So I forgot to. I don't know what I'm doing here. It's like I'm new here. So we got a little gift basket here. I'll wait till Anna gets back there. We got a little gift bag here for you. Just some things from our sponsors, things from our line of stuff, and just an appreciation to you for joining us tonight.
Well, thank you very much. That's awesome.
So now you got an extra T-shirt or two
Beautiful.
for your.
I do burn through those suckers.
Good.
I was telling you before the podcast, like a lot of the clothes that I get are either, now going out and doing some of these festivals and stuff, people give me clothes, or they're just my friends they're cleaning out their closets, and
Yeah.
I've got a reputation for taking their good pearl snaps. So if somebody's they're like, hey, I got these 2 pearl snaps, but basically all my clothes, come from secondhand, and they're just kind of beat up, or people are nice enough to gift them to me. But I'm pretty hard on equipment. I mean, if I got something, I'm gonna use it, and so I that's how I treat all my clothing too.
So are you still day working, or are you doing more of the video and planning and event type stuff now?
It's way more video and event stuff now. Really, it's kind of unfortunate. I do miss it. But the day working now at this point is like when I have the time, I'll go out and help my friends and stuff. But it's sometimes I still need it just to be able to have fuel to get to the next place or whatever, and I go out and work for people. But cowboying every day, it's a lot less of my life than it used to be, and it's a lot more just traveling around and spending a few days here on this ranch and a few days there. But it's I wish there was more day work, but it just kind of fits in where it can fit, I guess.
Sure. Okay, so you do have a couple of questions?
I do.
All right, so we're gonna take a couple more questions before we let you get out of here.
All right, that sounds good.
But first, I want to thank American Hat and Joby's Hats, 2 of the biggest supporters of the channel. We forgot them at the top. I was so excited to have you here. I forgot it at the top of the show.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Oh, those guys, right?
Well, Joby was here earlier. I don't know if he's still listening, but he said, "Hey guys," and I said, "Hey, Joby."
He's probably like, he didn't say us. But Joby's Hats and American Hat. American Hat is the official hat of Cowboy Cartel. I can't even talk. We've been on so much tonight. And Joby's our official shaper. So if you need a hat, I hope it's an American, and Joby's got you covered.
So the question I have here is, what's your choice of boots when you work cattle? And did you find good quality boots in other countries?
Well, that's a good question.
Mhm.
I burn through boots pretty quick if I'm using them every day to work, actually. So I've had several different pairs. I had one pair of double H's, I think, when I was in Australia. That's what I was wearing.
Before you went barefoot.
Before I went barefoot. Those were, and then Battleborn boots gave me probably the nicest pair of boots that I've ever had.
Really?
They're based out of Nevada. Darcy is a friend of mine. They make some really cool boots, but they're a smaller brand. They're not everywhere, but really nice boots. And then I've also got Allen's boots in Austin. I guess Ozelado is their actual boot brand, but I've got a pair of Ozelados that I also wear, and those are really nice boots. And I think they just started making like actual fitted custom boots. I don't have a pair yet, but a bunch of my friends have gotten them, and they really like them. So in Texas, that's the spot in Austin.
Yeah, we lived in Austin before we moved up here, so I've been to Allen's several times. What else you got?
Beef Wellington asks if you've ever met Dwayne Noel from Dry Creek Wrangler School. It's a YouTube channel.
Oh, I've definitely seen his stuff before. I don't know him. I've never met him. I would like to. I believe he's from Wyoming also, but I'm not sure. I don't know a whole lot about him, but I've seen his stuff everywhere on
Okay.
YouTube. I really like what he's doing.
Well, maybe what you guys need to know is go to his YouTube channel and talk about us, and then maybe he will watch this
Yeah.
episode.
There you go.
And you guys go over and follow Dusty Vaquero YouTube. If you're watching this on YouTube right now, it's pretty easy. Click over after the show.
Yeah.
And we'll put so what we're gonna do is we're gonna take this live and we're gonna cut it into a podcast, and it'll be probably tomorrow be on our YouTube. So we'll put links to all of your social media in there, as well as the Dusty Vaquero, and we'll tag you and stuff in that. So.
And the festival coming up.
Yeah,
DustyVaqueroDays.com.
yeah, we'll put all that information down there.
Mike K. Hey, Mike. He says, I just joined in Mongolia. Do they use similar boots for riding as in the US? Did you see brimmed hats that serve similar purposes as cowboy hats?
Yeah. So they do wear in Mongolia. They wear somewhat similar shaped boots. They're a lot more kind of rudimentary, kind of raw boots, I guess. So they have a heel on them, and generally they're just all black, and they come up to the middle of your calf, and nothing fancy about them, but kind of a big round toe on them. But that was what they wore, and they really like. I guess also that last question asked if I had found any boots elsewhere in the world, but I guess Mongolians probably had the best boots. But something that you realize once you leave the States is a lot of, especially things in the Western culture, but most of it comes from the U.S. So if you, like in Sweden, if you see a pair of cowboy boots, they came from here.
Yeah.
And they shipped
Or
them
Mexico,
over there.
right?
Or Mexico, yeah.
Yeah.
They, same with Australia, maybe there might be a couple boot makers down there, but generally, they're bringing in boots from overseas. So
That's
anything even kind of similar to a cowboy boot was probably made in the U.S. and then sent to these other countries. As far as their hats, they kind of liked the what do you call that? Like a bowler kind of very short brim hats, or kind of like an open road. Those are big here in Fort Worth. Those open road hats, but real short brims. I don't know that they wore them to protect them from the sun. They just looked cool, I think. But that's what they had in Mongolia.
Okay, not the cowboy style, right?
Not really cowboy. They were just real short and I think decorative more than anything else.
And someone wanted to know, who did you say made your hat?
This is Samson Moss. It's Prairie Wind Hat Works, and they're out of Alberta.
Samson Moss.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think his Instagram is Samson with a P.
Samson with a P.
It's spelled out exactly that way.
SAM.
SAMPSON.
All right. I was missing a P here. Okay. Thank you. And I think that's all.
Okay. Sounds good. Hey, JB, we really appreciate you being here. It's a fantastic book. I can't wait to get to the end of it, and I can't wait to see what you got coming next. As a matter of fact, tell these guys where you are going to be next, because I saw you have kind of some events coming up on your schedule. You're going to be here in Texas again after the... No, it's not updated, is it?
What did you...
You're going to Amarillo or Abilene?
Abilene. I might be at Western Heritage in Abilene. As far as like big events coming up, we've got Dusty Vaquero Days in May. I'll be up at Old Salt Festival in Montana. I think that's July. You'll have to look it up. Old Salt. I think I'll also be out at the Ramblin' on the Ridge Music Festival, which is in Craigmont, Idaho. That's in July. Trying to think what other.
You going to be at Cheyenne?
I will be at Cheyenne Frontier Days in some way. Nothing official though.
Right.
I'll be hanging out. I don't think I have any events planned there. My buddy Carson Jeffrey's playing a show the day of the Sunday short round. So if you're around, come out and see Carson in Cheyenne.
We actually might be going to Cheyenne too, so we'll shoot you a text message if we come down there, and we're looking forward to coming up there.
Oh, there is one other cool event I'm doing July 8th in Cody, Wyoming.
Oh yeah.
At the Buffalo Bill Museum up there. We're doing there's going to be a big event up there, and I'll be giving a talk on my book. It's right after the 4th of July in Cody, Wyoming. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Big PRCA rodeo, parade, all kinds of stuff. So just right after that, they're going to have me come in and do a book talk, and some other local guys. They're going to play music. They're going to show some films and stuff like that. So if you're around Cody, Wyoming in July, that's where I'll be.
There you go.
All right.
All right. JB, thanks for being here. We really appreciate it, guys. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.
Thanks for watching.